Hey everyone, hope you're doing well out there. In this season finale episode, my guest was Señor Diablo. He's a documentarian, filmmaker, photographer, educator, and prop maker. We talked about a range of topics, and I'm so excited for you to dive into this one. But real quick, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has stuck with me for season 1 of Conversations with Carswell. This will be our finale episode, and season 2 will start next year. I'm looking forward to bringing more excellent people your way soon. And with that being said, here's Diablo. You are a documentarian, educator, prop maker, videographer, and photographer. I feel like every scene wishes they had someone like you to document the culture in their city, especially when looking back fondly with friends on past shows and being able to pull it up from the Diablo archive. The work you do is so important to preserving our culture, and your kindness has radiated through our community and inspired us. Señor Diablo, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. And it's like, oh, I do all those things?
Yeah, it's a long list. Absolutely. But before we dive in, I have to know, what made you choose Señor Diablo as your moniker, especially given how wholesome you are?
So the origin of that, it goes back, I guess, 20 years now. So my friends and I, we would just make like no budget movie projects. And one of the projects, I created that character to where I was playing multiple characters. I was playing 4 different characters, and Señor Diablo was one. And within it, it was sort of a parody of the Power Rangers is what we were sort of going for. And over the course of the series, this character who seemed like nice and benevolent would turn out almost to be sort of like, because he was the right-hand man of the president of this fictitious cola company that had hired, it was called Team Switchblades, was like the name of like the crime fighters, and they fought robot armies like that. Stupid stuff you make when you're growing up. But eventually he was going to turn out to be sort of like, the Dick Cheney behind the scenes, like the main sort of evil person, even though he puts on this sort of like facade that he's incompetent. So it was almost sort of intended to be like a wink at the audience from the get-go. Like, this guy's name is Mr. Devil. He can't be all good.
Right.
So it was just sort of almost like a joke within it. And then when I got asked to like start doing MC stuff with Belushi Speedball, Vinny of Belushi Speedball said, hey, because he'd seen that character, and it became like a running gag character in different film projects that I would make over the years too. He said, could you play that as like a host, just an intro? And I said, sure. And from there, it became a regular thing to where it's like, oh, can you do it for the next show? And eventually I just sort of became part of the band. And from there, that's where it sort of came from. And along the way, I started documenting. And now it's funny that I've moved on past Speedball. A lot of people are like, oh, you're Diablo. Yeah. And when I say stuff about Speedball, like, oh, you were in that too? So it's weird how the name sort of prevails, but yeah, shifting. So that's a long, rambly answer as to where.
Gotcha. So, yeah, I love that history from going from like what being known for under the same moniker for one thing, then another, and then jumping to another. Now it's like a lot of people just know you as Señor Diablo, the videographer and documentarian. Mm-hmm. And so it's cool that how that just continues to evolve over time.
Yeah, I never would have like predicted it. It's just, I just like going with the flow and seeing that weird journey where life takes you. Mm-hmm. So
that's awesome. What was your first encounter with punk culture that made you think this is where I belong?
In terms of like the Louisville scene, I suppose,
or in general, if you grew up somewhere else.
No, I grew up here. I guess for me, like I had gone to the occasional shows back in the day. But for me, the first time that I ever got like really involved with the scene was, well, I guess I could almost say entered the scene versus got involved. Because when I started out with Belushi Speedball, it was just sort of I'll show up, I'll play this character for this gig, and then just sort of bounce. And in those early days, the scene was very different. And, I hesitate to use the word gatekeepy, but that's kind of how it felt, is like you had to earn your keep. You have to play like crap shows until you've hung out long enough. Now you can have a decent show. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that 2014 was when we first started playing shows, and I would just pop on in, do my thing, and then dip. But I would say around 2016, 2017 was when I really started like kind of becoming more captivated by that community, because we played our first show at House of Blood. I don't know if any of your projects ever used to play there.
I remember that, but I don't think I ever played there.
And then we ended up playing at Kaiju. And I think like the first time I really felt like, okay, we've kind of tapped into the scene was playing at Kaiju with Boner City and Dick Titty Blood Punch. And then we ended up going on tour that summer with Dick Titty Blood Punch. And I even like made a documentary around like what that tour was like. But, all throughout then, it's like I wasn't really like doing the documentarian thing. I was just sort of like in and out of the scene. So actually falling into that role, like becoming involved, would probably be like July of 2017. And so for that, without getting like too elliptical or too like, dark or anything, growing up, I was always like, super close with my grandparent and then my grandmother's sister, my great aunt. And by the time 2017 rolled around, had kind of gotten estranged with my grandfather, just because he was almost sort of gaslighting towards my grandmother at the end. And I get like health issues and all that sort of stuff like that. That's going to cause tension. But I still stayed close with my great aunt. And she had been like gradually like succumbing to dementia for a while. So we ended up moving her into an assisted facility. And then it got to the point to where she wasn't wanting to like eat or drink. She just kind of given up on life. And so it was one of the nights that she was in the hospital, and I brought like one of my video cameras, because I've been going every time I'd see her, I'd do a little bit of filming, try to get some stories, because even when I was in middle school, I was just filming all the time. But mostly the focus was like just family and stuff like that. But, that was sort of the day to where I felt like that transition shifted from like doing that to the scene, because, I brought the camera to the hospital thinking maybe I'll like film some sort of moment, which the day prior, I think it was, she was a little bit more livid. And there is a funny moment where I remember the TV was on and she's watching and she's like, "Why is Donald Trump on the news?" And we were like, "Because he's the president. They're talking to him." And she's like, "No, quit messing with me." Like she had no idea. And I started to convince her, and my brother's like, "Let her not know." So
maybe it's better to live in a world where like maybe ignorance is truly bliss about this certain fact.
Yeah. So it was a funny moment, but like that night it was very much bad. She got to the point where, because she had gotten like so dried out and all that sort of stuff, like they were trying to like force like a tube and all that sort of stuff on her. And, I was there to kind of like help with, and, there was a moment that was very much like a something out of a zombie film, because they had an oxygen mask on her. And at that point, like she was just like throwing up blood and they're trying to like sedate her. And, I remember she like turned to me and she just was like screaming, pleading, just like, "Don't let them put me on a machine. Like, please just let me die." That is one of those things that like you remember is like a relative like begging you to let them die. And so the doctors cleared everybody out. And then I remember just kind of sitting in the parking lot of, I'm trying to remember the hospital out here in the South End. It's like something in St. Mary's Hospital. But I got a call from Amy Abau with Dick Titty Blood Punch, and she was like, "Hey, you coming up to the show tonight?" And, I was like, "What is the show?" And it was Boner City's last show. Because they would do their last performance at Louisville is Dead, but like that was their last show. It was Mosquito, Mr. Clinton of Pink Cigarettes, Dick Titty Blood Punch, and Boner City. And I was like, you know what? I need to get out of this parking lot. I need to go do something. And so I got there right as Mr. Clit had finished performing, and then just, enjoying being there for Dick Titty Blood Punch because we'd just gotten back from tour with them. And then when Boner City got on, it's just something about like the energy of the room changed, because I think everybody at that moment realized like this is the last time we're going to hear these songs in this environment. And so you feel that from the crowd, that sort of shift. And I had brought my camera in just because, but I was like, I want to film this. Like it was just like this, my brain clicked. It's like, this is worth like remembering, preserving type thing. Because, I'd brought the camera for like a completely different purpose, didn't use it for that. And then there I used it for that. And I started like kind of holding it up and filming. And I remember McKinley Moore went and got like a chair so that way I could stand on it and film overhead like the whole audience. And just that sort of watching, the movement of people, where it's like the mosh pit is shifting like a wave pool, but the band is creating the waves. So everybody's shifting with sound waves. I'm just like, this is so cool to see from up at this perspective. But in that moment, like all that stuff, that stress that I had like been dealing with at the hospital, like completely left my mind, and so afterwards, I hung out with some people and then went back to the hospital. And at that point, she was sedated. The only person who was there was an aunt of mine who's a retired nun. So it's just, I remember sitting there almost just sort of like the show still radiating off of me, while like just the slow, quiet hours of like AM in the hospital. The only sound was like my aunt just like slowly going through the rosary, just doing it over and over. And, just the sounds of the machines until like the sun came up, and then somewhere shortly after the sun came up, she took her last breaths, and that was that. And so that's a very long, probably morbid story as to like how I guess I could say I shifted, like when my brain was like, the scene is important because it can help you expiate like so much emotion and that sort of thing. Like that's when my brain kind of was like, here, this is this door from this previous part of your life is closing, but like this door is wide open sort of thing. So, yeah. That's a very long answer. I apologize.
Oh, no, that was absolutely beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, if people go to these shows and you never know what they're going through, but like for just a few hours, you are all experiencing this thing together as like one like combined consciousness almost, and you're all experiencing it emotionally as well. And yeah, that's a beautiful like parallel you draw between like these two things that are ending, but this one door that is opening. And there's always like a light, and there is, a beauty in all those aspects as well. So I appreciate you sharing that. And
sure.
Shouts out to, of course, Boner City and Dick Titty Blood Punch. Shouts out Little Heart Records. Brian Puckett, it's really special times, and I'm super glad. I haven't seen that video, but I definitely want to look that up, because that is definitely a special moment in Louisville history.
Yeah, and it's amazing how quickly it changes too. Like, because I've got a bootleg Boner City hat, and I was wearing it to a Tab show, and one of the members of the Tabs was like, "Who's Boner City?" I was like, oh, is that far gone? But it's the same as I wore a Mosquito shirt to a different show, and someone's like, "What's Mosquito?" I'm like, "Oh God, it happens faster than you think." So I think that almost is sort of one of the other reasons I like documenting is it's like, go back and look, at this sort of thing. So
I feel that way when I mention Xerxes and people are like, who? Or Mountain of Sleep. And people are like, whoa, what? And it's like Mountain of Sleep's last show was like one of the craziest moments in Louisville history for me. And it just was I'm not sure if it was well documented when it happened. So it's amazing to have you, doing this for all these shows so we can, when these moments happen, people can actually pull it up and look back.
Yeah. And that was something I just sort of stumbled into it in all honesty, because once I kind of filmed a few shows just for fun and uploaded the footage, I had bands saying like, "Oh, nobody does this." Yeah. Like nobody films like a 30-minute set.
Yeah.
And just uploads, and it's like, here you go. Because these bands be like, we've got like Instagram reels that we'll try to like video record to keep. And so, yeah, just that feedback, I was like, well, okay. So I don't have I always feel like when people ask like, well, why is it that you keep doing it? I'm like, it feels very dumb to just be like, no, it's nice. But I mean, that's sort of the reason, as goofy as it is, but
Right. That, and it's great practice as well. I imagine, find yourself getting better and better, finding good new techniques or new camera settings, over time, or new ways to, avoid getting the camera knocked out of your hand.
Yeah.
You probably get better at dodging, or as you say, keeping your head on a swivel,
Yeah, I was proud that only once in all of that LDB showcase on Friday did the camera get knocked out. Because I was like, okay, I'm figuring out a system and it got kicked a lot. People fell. At one point, it got kicked out of my hand and it was like sliding across the pit. Like,
oh no.
Like at the beginning of Temple of Doom when they're chasing the antidote, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to get a new camera. And then I managed to catch it and it's like, oh, it still works. I was like, okay, so I'm getting better at figuring out how to make it to where if they're kicked, they don't break instantly, because there are ways if I don't have it set a certain way, like it will happen. But I know every one of them's on borrowed life, given like how I film, because I just like filming in an immersive way. Like I almost like it to where it's sort of POV, but it's also like beyond. Like it's not me wearing a GoPro on my head. Like it's almost like an extension of like my point of view type stuff.
Yeah, like
I don't know.
Extension of your body, or extension of your POV is cool. I like that. That's something I would be terrified of. But like it must be a great camera to is it an older camera?
Old-ish, yeah. It's a Sony NX Cam 30U, I think is what it is. Because I have people ask a lot, because like I see a lot of cameras where they almost take like two hands to hold type stuff. And a lot of those Sony models from that era are like that. I like that this one, when I hold it, I can like put my fingers through the grip and just pretty much almost like palm it in my hand if I need to, in case things get crazy. Or I can have the view screen out and hold it with two hands if it's chill. It just depends on the show. So, I like them for that reason. But I also know that just as many people that dig the style, others are like, makes me motion sick. Fair enough. I understand.
I feel like it may come from that era where like the Nokia brick phone like era, and the cameras from that era were just like, they were just made like tanks. You could toss them across the room, get run over by a car, and they just work still. Like there's in the Nintendo Museum, they have the Game Boy that survived a Gulf War like bombing.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, it's an old Game Boy Color, and there was a bombing, and it looks crazy, like it's all burnt and melted, but it turned right on. And like Nintendo was like, yeah, we made them well back then, but now if you drop your Switch, I feel like, it just would fly into a million pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So it was definitely an era where where they made them really hardy.
Yeah, it's I got it. If as long as the viewfinder doesn't break, everything else seems pretty resilient. So it's a lot of it is me finding ways to keep the viewfinder from just getting snapped off. Because once the viewfinder is snapped off, it still thinks that it's running and open. So it's not that you can look through it and film that way. Like it's once it's broken, those are shot. So that's the main thing I found with them. But it's surprisingly resilient, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of electronics are deceivingly so, at least from that era and further back.
Interesting. Yeah. Those types of cameras are just like a special era for sure. And it sounds like you've been through a few of those, perhaps.
Yeah, the one that got kicked on the floor, that was my fourth.
It was your fourth.
Yes.
Yeah. Because when I heard like, when the viewfinder breaks, it does this. I was like, okay, he's got some experience with these. How do you have more in reserve, ready to go?
I'm always looking at eBay to see. Okay, that one is because you can usually get them used around $800, but I'm always looking to see like, are they cheaper? Because they are only 1080p, and everybody's switching to get like 2K, 4K. I don't know why. I guess just because everyone wants that, because most devices people are watching on are not 2 or 4K stuff, right. But it's the hip new thing. So but yeah, the others, I have a display case and just sometimes a battery will break or a microphone will get like too dirty to use, anything along that line. It's just this clear plastic container that's like on display. And if something breaks, I just throw it in there. So it's just this box of like broken cameras that have been destroyed from shows. It's like,
so you could probably make several cameras from all the parts in there if you really wanted to.
If I knew what I was doing, yeah.
Right. I'm sure there's a YouTube video out there of like somebody taking apart the camera.
Yeah.
But that'd be pretty wild. You probably have to get a full tool set with tiny screwdrivers and all that stuff.
I'd have to learn, I think, probably how to solder or something.
Yeah, soldering as well. Yeah, that would be a whole thing. But so I was wondering, how has documenting shows changed your relationship with music, especially after doing so many of them? Do you find yourself like listening to music on your own more or less, or do you find yourself having a more closer emotional connection to music through that experience?
I wouldn't. I guess one thing that comes to mind is I wouldn't say that I listen to music more outside of shows. Almost infuriatingly, because a lot of bands will be like, "Hey, we dropped a new album. If you want to take a sneak peek, check it out." And with rare exception, usually I'm like, if I want to hear a song for the first time, like I want to hear it live. I love going in to see a new band, and it's like they might have a couple albums online, but it's like I want to guess what you sound like in person. Just because even though when you go to perform, you might have practiced, it doesn't come off as rehearsed. Whereas if I'm listening to recordings, it's like, oh, that wasn't good. Do another take. And like, you're never going to have those like little mess ups usually within recordings. Whereas, I don't know, there's just something special about like going to shows, and it's almost even less about the music and the genre and so much that person or group of people, to where there's something innately human about wanting to create, to express yourself that way. And for it to be like perfectly rehearsed and choreographed and stuff, like it feels almost inauthentic to the human experience. Whereas if I'm at a show and a band starts up a song and they get a 10 second and they're like, oh, fuck, no. And they go into restart. I'm like, I love that. I'm like, that's my favorite part of your set. Even though they're in their head, they're like, oh,
it's ruined.
It's ruined. Yeah. The whole show's ruined because that little slip up. I'm like, I love that. Yeah. And anytime something, just all the eccentricities that you aren't going to get from, a CD. I saw like one thing that just popped instantly into mind was a couple weeks ago, Spider was playing at Portal, which I was unfamiliar with. I don't know if you are familiar with Spider or not.
Actually.
So sort of like Black death metal-y, and they dress as like vampires, and they're even putting on like these Romanian accents and all that, and they were playing at Portal on a Tuesday night. So it was pretty much me, the members of the other bands, and the people working at Portal. And that's about it. I'm out there, I guess, doing the Lord's work. It's like, all right, I'm out here capturing. But the very fact that he's staying in character, and I just know it's like, okay, you play for like big festivals around the world. And even though there's maybe a dozen people watching you, you're giving it your all, the same as you would for a huge crowd of thousands. Go you. That's endearing. I like it. And that to me is like that sort of appreciative charm. But then there's also that human element to where, he kept every single song, he would introduce it to where it's like, well, this is this song, next song is about the blood of the 12 babies, their heads torn off by wolves, and you drink it. Like, it was all this sort of like dark, morbid stuff. And he was doing it in that sort of Hungarian accent. And after one of the songs ended, there was just the quiet where he's like looking at his tuner. And I was just like, oh, this is like 60 seconds of silence. I'm loving this because the count has to tune. This is the best. This is
1 second must tune.
It's just, he was like, just this quiet, and he goes around and he looks at the drummer, and they say something, and he comes up and he's like, "We've got a couple more for you." And I was like, I almost busted up. I was like, yes,
that's great.
That's my favorite part of the show now. And all the music aside, I'm like, that is the regular band chatter. It's like, oh, we have some T-shirts over at the merch. Come say hello after the show. Like that. I'm like, I love that you still have to do that.
Yes.
But you're staying in character, and you're doing it for the 12 people. Like, you're giving it your all. Like, I love that. So I don't know. To me, I like going to shows where it's not necessarily genre specific, but it's more like, are you showing me you sort of thing and that is what I kind of almost like about shows, just as much as the music itself is getting to see people sharing themselves with you. So really the only bands to where it's like, I don't really have like what I would say is an enjoyable time watching them are the ones to where I'll go to the show and like, if you see them playing and like you listen to their music, it is pitch perfect, like dead on what the CD would sound like. And to me, like, hats off that is incredibly difficult to do, to play with that sort of like perfect, acumen or what have you. But if you're doing that, you're so darn focused on the music. It's almost like you've put a wall between yourself and the audience. And so it's hard to like, you're there about the music. You're not there about that connection with people. So it's like almost like the audience being there is incidental. And, there's like different examples that I've come across in a lot of different genres that were like that. They're not super common, but when they do happen, I'm like, all right, I've committed to filming, but you've got a wall up. So, all right, I'll just chill here for 20 minutes more and film. So,
yeah, it's focusing on like polish instead of focusing on like the personal relationship, like with the audience, like, or just focusing on the audience at all. It's almost like you're focusing inward, like almost like a self-centered kind of performance where you're just like, we got the MacBook sitting here. We got in-ears for like a 50 cap room. It's disingenuous. It can feel that way for sure. And, I get that. And it's definitely admirable that you're able to, get it to sound like the record. 'Cause that's really tough. It takes like lots of prep work and even more practice and like getting everybody tight. And, it takes a lot, but then at the end of it, you do seem to lose something there.
Yeah.
The audience. I love the way you put it. The audience being there seems incidental at that point, because everybody's kind of focused inward or looking at them or making sure everything's right, or shoegazing at the pedals and stuff, and it's making, because if you got a pedal board, this board is like, okay, for this part in the song and these two have to go on, and just it becomes a whole production instead of like a performance.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely feel that. And I love like listening to bands and like talking. And that's a cool thing in the punk community. It seems it's like, oh yeah, the record is good, but you got to see them live. It's totally different. It's crazy. I hear that so much with bands. It's like, yeah, the record was good, but that song, when they do it live, it's totally different. It's crazy. You have to see it. And it becomes this like, there's like a lore mythos behind a band. It's like, oh, when they do this song live, it's totally unexpected. It's a completely
different thing. Yeah. And that I think that's sort of the appeal of just punk in general. It's more about your emotion being true. And so any kind of technical prowess you have on instruments, that's secondary. But getting across that message, like, it's okay if it's raw and sloppy. And I'm like, I'm fine with that if that's the case. It's even to me like the appeal of hardcore and, even like hip hop. Like a lot of the time it's like the emotion takes precedent over the music. And that's not to say that the music for any of those genres is bad, but it's like you're putting so much emotion out there, especially I feel like in those genres that, that to me is like the big appeal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not many genres where you have like the crowd pile up, people like this line and this song got me through this. I'm going to be up there, that those kind of moments are rare to find in other genres sometimes. But they definitely have those moments in every genre where it's like this line like got me through this time. But it's it's really special, especially locally in those genres of music.
Yeah, I think there's even like different bands can produce those different emotions too. Like some of them, they can produce like happiness. Others can sadness. I mean, even like I've experienced like terror at shows. Like I love it. There's almost like a different flavor with genres and just with bands specifically that can produce those emotions. If like, okay, that's what I'm seeking tonight, sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a time I experienced terror at a show, and I think it was probably just when I was like young, like 15 or 14, and I saw like a impending doom or something live, and I didn't understand what was about to happen. Or being at Warped Tour, this is more funny than it is terrifying looking back, but it was a band called Acacia Strain that I had never heard and still not heard their music like after. The singer went on stage and he said like, look to your left, look to your right, kill both those people. And just they started doing this crazy breakdown, and I was just like surrounded by people like way bigger than me. And I was just like a kid out there. I was like, okay, this is terrifying. But it's like also nothing makes you feel more alive than those moments when people are swinging and you just like that adrenaline is actually going crazy and you feel like you are living life.
Oh yeah, and that's where I love like filming at hardcore shows. It's like, yeah, I realize I look very absurd because I'm having to move through the negative space. It's like I almost have to do the inverse of what everybody else is doing to not get hurt, to be able to like weave through them.
Right.
But, there's also that adrenaline rush of, making it through. Like when I was at that showcase, like, all right, I made it through 2, made it through 4 bands, still doing good.
Yeah.
It wasn't until like Weapon X where it's like just people piled on top of people. And just next thing I knew, like I got kicked where it's like, I was like, oh my God, did my jaw just pop out? And just grabbing it and it pops again. It's like, oh, did I just put it back in?
Oh no.
Oh my God. And like that happened. But it was last night I was at, the Split Intentions, Crossfire, like, there was a hardcore show there. And I had someone come up to me afterwards, and I'm going blank on his name, but I recognize the face all the time. And he came up to me and he said, "You're tough to catch." I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, I just see what shows all the time, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to see if I can catch him tonight. I was like, what? And he's like, dude, you wore me out. He's like, I kept moving, and he's like, you're just everywhere. And I was like, thank you.
What are you trying to say? Catch?
I think he was just trying to see, like, okay, can I just like collide into him? Sort of thing is what he meant. And it's just, I was dodging the whole night. I was like, okay, I guess I'm spry. Sure. So, it's that, I don't know, there's just that fun adrenaline rush. And you get that. I mean, you can get that from a lot of different shows, like being in the middle of a punk pit too. It's the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it's very much a different type of movement because, I don't know, I always kind of picture when I'm out filming, kind of what I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Boner City. It's like you just picture people as particles. And so the band is producing that sound, and it's very much like waves. And so all the people are moving like people in you know, on like floaties in a wave pool. And so if you know how to navigate that, you're not really going to run into people that often. Usually the only time you do is if somebody that doesn't know how to like sync up with that is like weaving through in a wild way. So I don't know. In one sense, I have like photographers look at me like, you're going out with that camera and that. It's like, yeah, I get it. To where you think, oh, if I went out there, it might get hit and broken. It's like, yeah, but I kind of figured it out over a lot of trial and error. You can, even if it's hundreds of people, like there's a way to like sort of ride the wave sort of thing. So I don't know.
Be like water.
Yeah.
Waving amongst the rocks.
Yeah. So that's a good way to put it. I like that.
Okay. What is the most profound change you have noticed in Louisville's punk scene since you have started documenting it?
I would say one of the big shifts is almost a shift to where all ages is critical to be able to have like a good show. So I guess that almost kind of falls into the line of like inclusiveness. Just because I think pre-pandemic, really the only all ages venue, like consistently all ages, and granted, I've only really been in the scene effectively, like, you know, hardcore since 2017. So you might be able to think of some others prior, but like, I feel like at that point it was really only Spinelli's downtown. I can't think of any others that were like consistently all ages, unless you're thinking like house show venues.
I forget if Uncle Pleasant's or Uncle Slayton's were all ages. If you remember those venues, those are old ones.
Because it also used to be the new vintage, I think. Was that one of the other?
Yeah. I think Uncle Pleasant's was, because like it was all ages for sure, because I was able to get in there. When I was a kid, I saw some metalcore bands on tour there, you know, and back in the day, We Came as Romans, I think, played there. Despised Icon played. They played their last American show at Uncle Pleasant's in Louisville. It was insane.
That's weird.
Yeah, and then their last ever show in Canada, where they're from.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very interesting. They may have come back and done another one since then, but at that time they were saying like on stage, like, this is our last American show for this tiny room.
And I think even by then though, like, I can't remember when Uncle Pleasant's closed. Was it like 2016?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Somewhere around there. But yeah, I just feel like because Brian Gauguin, the owner of Spinelli's, he always just, even now, like if you want to go play at Spinelli's downtown, it's $50 flat.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Because he wants to
really
make
cares.
It accessible. Like he cares about the scene. Yeah, he really does.
He's not doing it for the money like so many others have tried in the past, because that model fails every time. Whether it's losing your trust in the community or you don't make the money that you're trying to get after and then you stop doing it. It's a model that will always fail, is trying to do it for financial reasons.
Yeah, it's I can think of multiple venues to where it's like, eventually it's like, oh, why did people stop going there? There was like some sort of money related thing that burned bands and they stopped going.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like that era of the scene, that's when like, Happy You, Anemic Royalty. I'm trying to think of like, so many of the others. And then you also had like a lot of the hardcore bands like Nesh and some others. Like they were all sort of like, that was like the melting pot that like so many of the musicians now that are like in their 20s, if not 30s, that are active in the scene. Like that's where they got their start. I mean, I think even like Knocked Loose and Jack Harlow essentially got their starts there at some point in time, because that was really, one of those only all ages places. Post-pandemic, after Spinelli's downtown had closed, there wasn't anything. And so
there was a gaping void when it closed.
And so it's like all these different venues, at first they were just like 21 and up coming out of the pandemic, and shows were vacant. And it wasn't just because of fear of COVID, though I do think that was an actual thing too. There were a bunch of house shows going on because you had like the people that had grown up in that Spinelli's era. Now that like next generation was wanting to play shows and they didn't have anywhere. And so the ones that had grown up in Spinelli's and were nostalgic for it, it's like, all right, let's just start our own thing. And so slowly venues realized, hey, they're going to put on shows regardless. So we might as well find a way to lower the age and let them in. So, Whirling Tiger, it briefly went out, and then like when it reopened, it's all ages. Magbar has become like pretty habitually all ages. Like I think Kaiju is the only one that is still 21 and up. So I think like just that era of Spinelli's kind of changed the landscape of the scene to where now Louisville very much is like an all ages city, because anytime bands come through and they're like, it was kind of quiet. We didn't have many people show up. I'm like, you made your show 21 up. Make it all ages next time.
Yeah, it is. Spinelli set the standard and like of what is a successful model for a venue. Mm-hmm. And they were able to get past like the they didn't have a liquor license. I think they just sold, it was like PBRs.
Yeah.
And they had like, I remember like 25-cent PBR Tuesdays or whatever. So like they sold beer, but they were able to get past that. But I think, getting like selling liquor at your establishment, just like essentially, feels like you're printing money. And so you're like, you want to kind of keep doing that. So I think that's where maybe some other venues that keep it 21 up, their heads at, just like, listen, we just make so much money selling alcohol that's just not important to us. But it's really incredible that Magbar was able to do what they did, because that's just a straight up bar, and they're able to make all ages shows there happen. I'm super thankful for that. No matter like what you think of Magbar, like it's just super cool that those all ages shows happen there, and they're successful and they pack out because of it. Yeah,
like I was there on Wednesday and the place was packed, and it's like, it's a Wednesday night, and it's like, it's Shark Sandwich is steady. It's bands that I know y'all all have seen a lot, but it's like, it doesn't matter. It's a Wednesday night. It's an all ages show. We're going to turn out.
Yeah. And I feel like some people are more inclined to go to a place that they can like look up and know that it's a venue or a place that's bands have played at before they've been to, or they can like look up on the map and like go to, other than like maybe Steve's Kitchen, and they're like, I don't know Steve's Kitchen. I don't know if, I don't know what that place is going to be like, but people are more inclined, I feel like, to go to a venue, but unless you're like in the know. But I mean, house shows absolutely have their place, and they're they're forever, because they will always exist. They'll always be in the underground, and they'll always be awesome and super important. I've played a lot and been to a lot, and my very first introduction to the punk scene was a house show, and I had never been to a punk show before, but I had heard about it from like a friend of a friend of a friend, that there was a show happening on Chestnut Street. And this must have been like 2010, maybe 2011. And maybe earlier than that, but I just drove up and down Chestnut Street trying to find what was going on. And eventually I looked over and there was just like a table like out, and there was a girl out. She was taking people's money, and I was like, oh, there we go. And I just started hearing like the hum of music and drums, and I pulled over. I was able to get in, and she let me in. She was like, looked me up. She was like, you're pretty young. It's like, yeah, but I really want to see, the band that's playing here. And it was I think it was Pianos Become the Teeth. It was a band that I was like really into at the time, and that like wave of I think they called it like scrams, like Touche Amore, La Dispute, like kind of era.
Mm-hmm.
And the band opening for them was Vader Bomb.
Oh, okay.
And
I didn't realize Vader Bomb went back that far, man.
Yeah, and I was watching them, just I totally like shocked. Totally in awe. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because they were putting on a crazy performance where like the singer was like, he was getting punched in the face by the guitarist, and like the guitar, and they're punching him back, and like with the microphone. And so they're both just like bleeding from the face profusely, but it's all part of the set. And they were doing like skits and like wrestling moves. And I was like, what is going on? And like the band pianos, they were like watching like, what in the world is going on here? And halfway during their set, the police like came because somebody had called, and the owner of the house had like gone up and be like, okay, everybody sing happy birthday really quick. And everybody started singing happy birthday. And then like the cop like stopped and like heard everybody singing. And it was like, oh, it was like that meme of Homer Simpson going into the bushes. He's like, okay, like maybe I'll skip this one. And it worked. And they continued the song. Next band played, and it was just this amazing experience that it's like, this is so special. Like,
mm-hmm.
And it was just out of some guy's house, but it like felt like really personal. And I was able to like meet these bands, they don't go behind like a stage and you never see them again. Like they were just right there because it was a no stages kind of thing. And it was really awesome. And I knew from that point on that was something I wanted to be a part of for the rest of my life.
That's a fantastic introduction to it. And it's house shows. Yeah. They're the punk equivalent of venues, where it's like, no, this is going to be raw, and they're always short lived. Mm-hmm. Because it's a matter of time before some neighbor is finally like fed up on you darn kids.
Yeah.
Y'all having too much fun. I'm going to have to put a stop to that. But I always kind of describe house shows as, if they're good, it's like a lost civilization dancing on the edge of an active volcano. Mm-hmm. Like you realize you're very much on the cusp of like, this could all just come crumbling down, and like that is the fun of it.
Yeah.
Because I think back to, I don't know if you ever went to Friend's Mansion and its window. So yeah. So that was another one where I was like, I love this. Because when we played there, I remember the amount of people that were cramming it was absurd. Like it was just shoulder to shoulder, butt to crotch, just like people packed in. Or it took like 5 minutes to just get through one room in that house. There were so many folks. And as I walked across the main room where bands would perform, everybody during the histrionics were like jumping. And I remember the hardwood floor, just like you could feel those like floor joists just like undulating under like the weight, where it was like walking on a trampoline.
Oh my gosh.
Even though it was wood. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to fall through. And then, but it was like, I remember the first case of like COVID had been, I think like China had shut down, and the first case of COVID had like popped up in the US. So there was almost that sort of air of like, this is the end of the world party,
right? Sort
of thing that happened that night. Even though they would still go on to do a couple more shows. I think their last show was that Norma Jean show that they played there. Who did you see at Friend's Mansion?
I think I know Shark Sandwich was on there, and I don't want to say, I forget. I forget. I know, like, I was one of those shows I went to meet up with a friend who was also there, but I think Shark Sandwich opened, and I think it might have been one of Blake's bands at that time.
I think I was at that same show. Yeah, it was like
I was there. I saw
early
Blake
February,
there.
I think that year, January, February of 2020.
It was still like kind of cold.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who all played, but I remember that because as soon as you said Shark Sandwich, I think they only played there the once, but I could be wrong. But yeah, that was every single house venue. I'm sure you probably also had time in the wet basement. That was the aptly named wet basement.
I actually had never been to the wet basement before, but it sounds like I missed out.
It was multiple plays on word because one, anytime I'd set my first time I went there and I set my camera bag down, I remember picking it up. I was like,
oh, it's way heavier now.
Yeah, it's like, it was a carpeted basement, but the carpet was always wet. Always wet. Of course, you'd have to take a Benadryl going home because like all the mold spores and stuff getting kicked up by people dancing. It was,
oh my gosh,
it was rough. But then also wet basement because they would just, the people who like stayed at that house, it was a house that actually had a bar in the basement for whoever built it. And so they just sell like PBRs for like $1 if you could show your ID. So it was wet. And then we sell booze here too at a house venue.
Wow. That's
in no way legal, but it doesn't matter,
destined to just be pretty short living.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah. All those, anytime a new house venue pops up, I'm like, all right, I got to catch it while it's going, which knock on plastic, like Camp Spaceman.
I was just about to say.
It made it through the year.
Mm-hmm.
I was there twice when cops showed up and they were able to talk them away both times. But it's like, that clock's ticking.
Yeah, I got a good feeling about Camp Spaceman. No mold spores. So that's already pretty great.
Mm-hmm. And they've got a good system for like, when the police are called by the neighbors. But it's like, you're going to get that one neighbor that's probably going to be eventually persistent. So that's where I'm like,
there's a neighbor who's going to start plotting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's that's going to start happening. But until then, we hope it will last a very long time. Be with us for a while.
Yeah.
How does your experience as an educator influence your approach to documenting the punk scene?
Is this too long of a pause?
Not at all.
Okay. I think there's almost sort of like a twofold element that kind of factors in. One of which being just as an educator, I was always. Now I'm opening too many doors now in my head. I think one of them is that as just in education in general, and I think I even thought about this at one point in time. I think it was back when we were talking about bands performing. Are you there for yourself and your music? Or are you there for the audience?
Right.
I see that especially because I work in a high school, and high school is so content specific that there are some educators, and you can probably even think back to your own high school experience, where it's like, okay, they clearly liked their content better than they did the students. And I'm of the mindset where it's like, students should always be first. And I think that's sort of the downfall that I see of a lot of educators that very quickly get miserable because like now I'm sort of in a mentoring position with educators, and the ones that thrive are the ones to where, yeah, they like their content, but if you told them tomorrow you got to teach something different, they'd be fine with it. Because they just wanted to like teach high school students. So it's like they became teachers to teach students, but you have others where it's like, they became teachers to teach chemistry or to teach U.S. history. And so it's like, it's all about the content of them. So for me, I've always kind of seen like, back when, I used to perform, or even now with like, Little Michael, it's performing, thinking about how am I engaging the audience is always kind of the lens that I've looked through when it comes to like being on stage. And in terms of like, being off stage and documenting, it is just all about sort of the unspoken art of appreciation. Because if you build relationships with students, eventually, they'll hopefully start to kind of share like what they are interested in. And then if you are really trying to like make your class ideal for them, you sort of tailor it around that rather than being like, no, this is what I like. This is how I teach. You've got to conform to my style. It's like, no, be open to like changing yourself based on whatever their needs are. So it's being open to appreciating whenever people share that vulnerability to convey like, this is something I'm into. Because the first time that somebody shares, like, you can even think to like coworkers or something. Eventually, it probably comes up like, hey, I'm in a band. But whenever you share that music with them, their reaction, however they react to it, you're going to be like, all right, I'm never showing you music again. Or you're going to be like, hey, you should come to one of my shows. Like, it's going to be one of the two.
Right.
And with students, it's like you've got them for pretty much an entire year. And so that one little interaction can completely like change it forever, for the better, for the worse. So I think like when I'm going to shows, especially if I'm seeing a band for the first time, it's like I'm always kind of aware of that. Is for most bands, for them to get up and share, whether it's, punk, hardcore, anything, it is them being vulnerable to share, like, this is an emotion that I have. This is how I feel it is best conveyed. And I feel like some of you all will like, relate with it, that you're going to like fuck with it in some way. And so that is where like I go in with that same sort of sense of like reverence to appreciate. It's sort of like Fred Rogers always talked about how like appreciation is a holy thing. And like, if it is done wrong, you break that relationship almost instantly, sort of thing. So, because you never know like who you are going to interact with again later in life. And that interaction that you had in the past is going to dictate how you that interaction goes in the future. One thing that comes by, like you had Hoosier on as a previous guest. And I don't know if you knew, but like Hoosier is a former student of mine. No?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So the first time, and I'm going to, I want to be mindful, make sure I call them Hoosier and not refer to class name. But basically, yeah, I had them as, I think it was freshman or sophomore. But the first time that I interacted with them again after all those years, it was at a Y Dom's like showcase. And I was there just, to document because Jalen had reached out. I was like, hey, you want to come film? I was like, yeah, sure. I'm easy to where if somebody's like, hey, can you come film our show if I'm free? I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. I'm not picky about that. But as I was there, I filmed like a couple sets and I felt like a tap on the back. And he's like, what are you doing here? And I was like, I'm everywhere, which I'm like, it's not an untrue statement. And he's like, do you remember me? I was like, yeah, I do. Because it's like my brain, I'm like, okay, that's not a lie. Some neuron is firing.
Yeah.
But if you were like, all right, $100, tell me a name, I'm good. At that point, it's like that neuron, it's reconnecting. The dial-up internet's going in my head. It'll get there.
Yeah.
But it's not there yet. So, as soon as like, yeah, I remember. How's it going? It was good. And then all of a sudden it starts, and instantly I'm like, God damn. I'm almost like distracted from the music because it's like my brain's going through that like Rolodex of like,
right. Is
this somebody that I met at a show? So it's like, this person. And then he gets up and he's performing. It's like, all right, I had to have like met them at a show. Like my brain's trying to do the logical thing. And it wasn't until like there was like almost an intermission. And then who just started talking to me and was like, I can't believe you're here, checking this out. And I was like, yeah, I like going around to different shows and stuff. And then Coach Cam comes off stage and who's just like, hey, do you know who this is? He's like, yeah, of course I do. Like, I recognized him as soon as he walked in. I'm like, God damn it. Now there's two people. There's two people that were, and
they're brothers.
I know. Well, and I hadn't even made the connection, but it wasn't until like when Hoosier said, it's like, or no, Coach Cam said, it's like, yeah, I never had him in class, but, and then I was like, that's when Brian's like, oh, here's the data which you seek. And then I remembered like, oh yeah, they're siblings and pieced everything together. But, then Hoosier like told me a story of like, oh, you were always this teacher that was like cool. And, I did not have necessarily a good time at that school, but, you would always kind of like, when I was, he was like talking about wanting to kind of get into music, and it's just like, oh yeah, you always told me to just do it, sort of thing. And for me, it's like, I don't remember that interaction at all. I'm like, I assume it's true because it wouldn't be something, to make up. But that kind of gets into as an educator, you never know who you're going to come across again in life. So it's like, don't ever burn a bridge with a kid, no matter like, how much they might really make stuff rough for you and all that sort of thing. It's like, no, don't. Because I mean, my assistant superintendent that I work under, she also puts it well. She says, one day that kid that you want to burn a bridge with, you might end up in an assisted facility and they might be changing your diapers. And do you want somebody that you made their life hell for a year to now be in charge of you in that situation? And it's like, that's also a good, valid point. So long ramble short, it's basically I go in to document just to appreciate and to kind of show that like reverence, to not just be like, I'm here for a couple minutes, listen to the first song, I'm going to go out for a smoke break or something. It's like, no, I will be here for the duration. Everybody else might trickle out and leave. I'm here. And I will enjoy whatever it is that you've got to share, type thing. So,
yeah. That's so true. Like, I think we remember our good teachers more than we remember our bad teachers. And I think that's a unique aspect of that kind of relationship, because I feel like we remember a lot of the big negatives more than we remember the big positives when it comes to a lot of aspects in our lives. But for some reason, when I've talked to people, they remember the good teachers, the teachers that listened, that they cared about way more. They don't even remember the names of the teachers who made their life miserable usually. And, and so I imagine as a teacher, you may have an interaction that you don't remember, but it might be the catalyst that made them, take that next step that helped them towards success. And they think about you all the time, and they think about that interaction, but that might be something that just slipped your mind because you were quickly running to do something else, or you had 10 other things on your mind, but it's so true. And I think you can be said about all interactions we have with people, when you just open the door for somebody or smile at a stranger, they'll remember that, and that like really helps them in a big way. Yeah. And so it's a really special relationship you have with students. And I love what you said about like, every new class you get, you don't have like a lot of teachers, have like a syllabus or curriculum, and it's like, I've done it this way for this many years, and so we're going to do that, and you're going to force to fit my mold instead of you molding and being malleable around the students themselves, because every generation is different and every group of students is different. And the way you paralleled that with when you go and see another band, every band is different. You're not going to get the same experience from every band because they're full of different people from different generations, and every audience is going to be different as well. So having to navigate that and just being malleable, being able to shape around that experience and just be adaptive and dynamic is super important. I think that's really important for people to hear.
Yeah, and I just love like the weird fate of like, you never know. Just because it's like, Coach Cam and I had like interactions when they were a student. I was a teacher, but at that point, like the music scene wasn't even really on my radar. And I don't know if it was for them, but how weird is it that it's like, oh, we were on the stage together Like I got to introduce them at No Comply. I'm like, what a weird, like, diverging of paths and then reconvergence, like where you happen to reconverge. It's like you're two totally different people, at that point. But it's like, you never know. So,
yeah. Let's talk about No Comply.
Okay.
Can you walk us through the evolution of No Comply and how it grew to be the 1,000+ person event that it is today?
I can talk on behalf of some of the other members just because I was there at the start, but I wasn't part of the team at the start. So my understanding is like the two of the main people that kind of like it became sort of a hey, fuck it, why not? It was like a conversation apparently between Hawthorne Merkel and Jack Voldina, just hanging out at the skate park during kind of the waning years of the pandemic. And they just both happened to look down at the bowl because I think they were recounting like their fondness for like DIY shows and that sort of thing. And they just looked at the bowl and just thought, why not? And so the very first year was just like, essentially, hey, let's do something for the homies. Let's have fun doing this sort of thing. And so it was pretty much most of the people who were involved in some way, their bands. Like it was Sunshine's first band, but because Caden and Reeves were involved with it, it was Nerve House's first performance, Shark Sandwich. So essentially it was like this sort of like, hey, let's see if we can even make this work. And I don't think anyone even realized at the time that it was going to have like the impact that it did. Because that first show, if you watch the footage from it, there's maybe a couple hundred people there, but it's not huge. It's just sort of almost like a novelty at that point. And when they went on to the second year, like I was going, being the documentarian, I was just going to a lot of their, I compulsively hold my hand like I'm holding a camera. I was going over to their meetings and just sort of documenting just because watching them try to figure stuff out, to me, there's something fascinating about watching people try to figure things out. Like even before a show, if everything is plugged in, but for some reason it's like, my pedal board isn't working. And everybody comes around and hovers. I'm like, I love watching those moments where people, like, you can tell that they're trying to figure it out.
Gears are turning.
Yeah. So at that one, they were kind of expecting a bigger crowd, and they're trying to figure out, like, oh, what do we do? We can't get porta potties because they got tagged up last time. What can we do? And they're going to charge the big fine. And they started talking about like this idea of like camping toilets with like buckets and like rotations that who would clean. And of course, as like the quiet fly on the wall, I wanted to be like, guys, just pay the fee, just get porta potties. But anyway, the second one was essentially, I'm digressing again, but the second one was, I feel like a big showcase as to, who was popular in Louisville at the time, who was like really big. And that was when I think they were trying to think, I think that was when it sort of put on the radar, like, oh, this can be huge, because suddenly it went from like 200 to like 1,200. And everyone was like, what do we do with this many people? And that was the year like Histrionics, Zerg Rush, Shitfire, the Tabs, Nemic Royalty, Mr. Clinton, and Belushi Speedball. Like everybody was sort of like at that high point. And that really put No Comply as an event on everyone's radar. And so the group kind of realized like almost that onus was on them. Like, okay, we can't just like keep putting, if this many people are paying attention to it, it just can't be like, look at us and the homies, we're all cool. And so that's where they started thinking like, how can we start trying to bridge the gap between the different genres in the scene? Because I'm sure you found like you go to different shows, like, oh, there's certain people that you only see at metal shows versus certain people you only see at like hip hop or rap shows versus certain people you only see at punk shows. It's like there's these unspoken barriers that exist. And so that's where they started thinking, how can we have artists where if people are just showing up just for the event, like it's not about necessarily whoever's on the bill, even though that is a key factor, this is just a big party and celebration of the scene. And these are people we're highlighting. That's where they got like Nice and Horace Gaither on, just to try and bridge that gap between, the hip hop and rap community, especially because, speaking with some, like they had not had positive experiences at like punk shows in the past. Trying to bridge the gap with like the EDM scene, because it's like its own little island a lot of the time. And so when I got on the team this year, one of the things I did is I reached out to, all the different previous artists and was like, hey, tell me about like your experience here. Imagine your trajectory between when you started and where it was at the time you played No Comply, and imagine, what it would be like had you not played No Comply versus where you're at now. What might that difference be? And just, hearing them all kind of share, like one of the common traits I found was, Horace was like, I've been asked to play like on more like, punk and hardcore stuff. And then same with like, Connie, Pharmacy Girl, same sort of deal. And realizing, okay, that is an important element that we need to keep in mind is the genre is not specific. If anything, the more diverse it is, the more they feed into each other and help unify the scene. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's where like, this year trying to pick like, it was just mayhem from start to finish in like the best way. Cause we then thought, all right, now that we kind of realize it's important to have a mix of genres, what's the best way to organize them for maximum effect? Because I don't think it really got into we didn't get into hardcore until like the second band last year. Whereas this year it's like, no, let's start with hardcore. Let's just get stuff going. And we also felt like because so many people were there that were like punk or hardcore kids, that when we started out with an EDM artist, they're like, what do I do with my arms, my legs for this? And then once it kind of warmed up and people started shoving, it only takes one. Then they all sort of like got going. So we thought, all right, when we have Gunkus, let's put Gunkus between, a hardcore and a punk band. So that way it's like people got warmed up. And by then it's just like, okay, let's just keep it going, even though the music's changed. And so this year very much felt like it had like, I don't know, an excellent feel. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
It totally does. Yeah. Okay. From like looking over at the bowl and be like, wouldn't it be crazy if, and then like, how do we actually, like, we need bathrooms, like but they're going to tag them up so the company won't rent to us anymore, or they'll charge us so much. And, and to finding out what genres, like how do we stack the genres? And I think genre bending and blending is so important. And, some of the best, most like wholesome shows that I threw back in the day when I would like, thanks to like, Brian Puckett and Low Heart Records, like he was like, and to Brian, from Spinelli's, for at like 16 years old, letting me like book shows, like Naraya and I like book shows, like he would book a bunch way more than I, but one of them that I did like a Halloween show and I did a hardcore meets hip hop show. It was just 2 hardcore bands, 2 hip hop artists. And those shows were always great. Like it was 2 scenes just coming together and being like, more on the hip hop side, was like, what is, I don't know what's going on with you guys. Like, what is going on? And when they see it happen for the first time, they're like, whoa, this is different. But they feel and love the energy that they always talk about, the energy that you guys have here. Like, this is amazing. And at the end of like, you guys look like you're killing each other, but then like you guys are hugging at the end. And it's like, what is going on here? I love this. And everybody just kind of melding those 2 scenes together really unites, just the whole community as a whole. And it was beautiful to watch. Be like, oh, I'll check you out. We got to work together. We should do like a split together where like my band, does like some songs and you can rap over it. And like seeing them do those conversations, this is like made me endlessly happy. And I'd love to see more. I think, that is something that's kind of overlooked is like, oh, if it's got to be a rock show, it's got to be a hardcore show. But it's like, and people are kind of afraid to alienate an artist or maybe artists might be like, I'm a rapper opening up a hardcore show. I don't know how they're going to receive me, but you have to realize that, a lot of people who listen to like hardcore also love, hip hop as well, and it goes vice versa as well. So it's definitely a thing that can unite a community, is bringing all those genres together, because when we just have a subgenre of a subgenre of a subgenre show, and then it does feel gatekeepy and cliquish, and it only makes all the community better across the board if we let everybody in and make everybody feel invited.
Yeah, it's just, we're here to party, Yeah. Let's just see what everybody's got, sort of thing. But you mentioned like that idea of community, and that is something I like. When I got to be part of the group this past year, I kind of pushed just to keep in mind for when it comes to considering artists to put on, it's like there's no shortage of like incredible bands in Louisville right now. But I was like, I think it's important to highlight people that go beyond just that, but it is they're doing extra. Like, for example, when it comes to YDOMs, like Jalen, and Mark, both, they're always putting together these big showcases of like different artists. And so it's almost like they took that spirit of No Comply and tried to imbue it within the shows they put together. It's like, let's all come up together.
Yes.
And also, like, I would see Jalen at like Spinelli shows on a Monday night, checking out, random stuff. But it's trying to learn the scene, and not for the purpose of learning it to exploit for like listens or money or anything, but it's like you're trying to learn so that way it's that same sort of idea, to where it's like I could tell watching YDOMs that, the way they performed 2 years ago versus now, very different. And they could easily have been like, no, this is our thing, and the people who like us will come around. But instead they recognized, let's tailor our music to where the scene is at now. And I think that is a very important thing that was very much on showcase when they performed. So, with each of the bands that performed, like whenever the No Comply team, we were sort of like hashing out, like, because we threw out, I think it was like 43, like we just put up a dry erase board. It's like, just start naming bands, naming, and just anybody where it's like, okay, this band is fire. Like, we just write them all down. And then from there, it became like that debate of how do you whittle that down? And so that was always my big push, was everybody who's on the bill in some way, we should be able to say they're doing something different in terms of what they're contributing to the community of the scene as a whole, in addition to just they've got awesome music. So that was sort of, at least I think, something. And then my character that I was playing with, like the little like MC host, I tried to sort of like convey that with like some of my goofy monologues, as to like, this is what this band does different. That's sort of like why we wanted to put them on, sort of thing.
And yeah, Jalen absolutely is amazing. Like, not just going to shows and supporting, but behind the scenes, just like supporting people online, going on Bandcamp and buying every local band's like EP on Bandcamp, making sure to support them directly, and always getting merch. And all that while like being like a dad, is really, really incredible and inspiring to me. And yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to work with him, going forward. He was just really inspiring to me, and just a really positive force for the scene. So I've been dying to know, what is your process for designing and creating props for live shows? And I'd love to learn specifically about that blood squirting prop you made for No Comply.
Okay.
And what inspired that, and how did you develop that?
That night went so off the rails in the most chef's kiss beautiful way. So I guess for me, I mean, I will say that like doing makeup effects, like prosthetic makeup and props and all that sort of thing, that is actually like, if you go all the steps back, that's actually where I kind of like started in my creative like outlet, is like in high school. I thought it would be cool to like be one of those like makeup effects guys in Hollywood type thing, until I realized, oh, it's the late 90s. That's sort of getting phased out because CGI everything. So, I mean, a lot of the prop, shops, like they all sort of closed up.
Guar's still touring.
That is true.
Guar's still doing their thing. So,
so there's still a need.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and then I started doing like scripted films just because I'd always wanted to make movie projects. And so I thought, you know what? I know how to do this. So I always kind of wrote to my abilities and resources, but at the same time, something that would push me to where it's like, okay, I know how to do like prosthetic work on someone's face. I'm going to write a character who has a parasitic twin. I've never done prosthetics on like the abdomen, but I'm giving myself a little challenge. Yeah. So like with each thing, I like giving myself like, I should be able to do it. I don't know how, but I should be able to. So, when it came to a lot of the props, when I was in Speedball for the better part, the majority of like the stage show stuff, like, building all the props and that was like me just being like, I think I could build this sort of thing. I like being in Little Michael to where it is very much like a theatrical collaborative. Because, Speedball, it was essentially, it's like we're a thrashcore band that happens to have a stage show, whereas Little Michael, this is like musical theater of the absurd. And it's like, oh, it's a bunch of theater kids happen to learn how to play instruments is how it feels. So they had, there was the idea, like, we'll just throw out like goofy ideas as a group. And I'd come up with the idea of like some sort of like weird cult ritual. And I thought at first, I was like, let's just do that as the whole theme. Like, let's do something that almost borders on like a satanic ritual. And everyone at first is like, ha, 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 isn't this silly? And after a while, it's like, we take it so long that they start to get uncomfortable. And that's where the humor gets in. Because eventually you keep doing this, it's going to be like, are they
joking?
Are they joking? This seems like
it's a lot of steps here.
It's like, ha, 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 I haven't gone to church in 10 years, but that part that was bred into me is getting uncomfortable now at the thought of Satan coming up, sort of thing. Because
maybe this wasn't the best first show to bring my mom to.
Yeah,
to prove her that it was a really positive thing, whatever.
Because the idea that I pitched out to the group, as I said, what if we did a satanic ritual and we brought forth Satan? And so it's like we did as close to an actual satanic ritual as we could in the bowl. And so that way it's like you get the humor, people feel uncomfortable, but then like Satan comes forth or like somebody gets possessed, something along that line. And then next thing you know, the archangel Michael comes down to earth because that's who cast Satan into hell. But it turns out that the only reason we brought Satan forth was a decoy, so that way Front Michael could kill the archangel Michael and become the new Saint Michael.
Oh my God.
So we had this, that was sort of, it's like, let's not only resurrect Satan, but kill an angel.
Oh my
as like the theme. And then a couple of members were like, it's kind of getting a little dark. So then it turned into just, the ritual idea stayed, and then it turned into, it's like, what if we're just all getting killed ourselves? And then Eve suggested like, oh, could I get thrown into like some big shredder, like an industrial shredder, wood chipper? I was like, yeah, I can do that. And they initially thought, well, could we just have like some sort of like big box? Like they wanted to be absurdly big. And that's where I kind of had to be like, guys, I've done 2 stage shows down in the bowl. There is not a lot of storage room down there. Because even behind the stage, everyone's guitars and amps will be stacked there. And you try to do that little run around and then gravity like overtakes you on the edge of the bowl and you slip. Like we can't have a big box down there. So I came up with the idea of like, well, what if, could we have a trap door? So I talked with John, who's also on the team, and he built the stage. I said, can we have like a hidden trap door? And then I just like put this down on it in some way, shape, or form. And that way, like maybe Eve just gets like kind of fed most of the way in, but they're sort of sticking out was sort of the incarnation there. But then it eventually turned into, well, let's just feed all the members through it. Because it's like, if we're going to that effort to cut a hole and feed them through, might as well do the whole thing. And so that became sort of the end climax of like the members all getting fed in by the blue men who came out of a Chinese dragon horse. Because it's just, it's throwing out random ideas. And like, if it's so dumb, it makes people laugh. Like, all right, let's just go. Like, it doesn't matter that it doesn't make sense. That's the joke, is that none of it makes sense. And, so from there I was like, okay, I think I can do it. So I got a 32-gallon garbage can, and it had like cut like one of the sections out, and from there just like decorated it with all sorts of like empty containers, things that looked like one part was a sushi tray that I had painted. Another part was, I'm trying to think of all the things on there, an empty planter from Lowe's. It's just like, okay, this thing looks like it could be another thing if it's painted, and I put a couple stickers on it. And so it was actually, to be able to like get it all set up, the giant like column that had like, the There Will Be Blood warning, that was Coach Cam's podium. That was actually the shipping box that was delivered in. And so my character, the Michael Maker character, accidentally stumbles across it and tears some of it off. They're like, oh, that's our gravy machine we ordered from Alibaba, I think is what we came up with. And so I'd even like, because it was like one of those thick shipping boxes for clothing, it's like, man, this will take forever to cut through. So the white label in and of itself that had the tape around it, that cardboard was already completely cut out. And like I had a tab inside that had like the tape around it. And so I knew if I just lay the box this way, and then I should be able to, like, as I'm unpacking it, take the cardboard out, take the hatch lid, move it down. And then like it was probably about 25 gallons of blood with like a sump pump and a hose running under the stage that just feed it up, assemble it, and boom, it's good to go. And I had those like lights that you've got at Christmas, like the little switches. So I had like a remote control that I could just turn it on. So that's how it should work. Now we get into the element of like, everything's live.
The elements.
All the elements. So at first I'm sitting there trying to get stuff set up, and I realized as I'm trying to set up, I was like, shit, the secret hatch won't move. And that's when I realized the pandemonium of like just the night, the crowd had moved those barriers up just from the motion of like everybody, the whole pit working them up. So the barrier had pushed back one of the subwoofers in front of the stage to where it, like, I couldn't move the hatch and slide it in because it was in the way. I was like, oh, fuck. And I couldn't, like, stop and fix it all because everybody's, like, watching. So, like, the little Michael, they keep going on for bits. And finally, I'm just like, don't wait on me. Just go. And so they start up the song, and I kind of joked. I was like, it was almost like my Batman moment because I had to slide down with like my lower back on the edge of the stage, and I put my feet up against the barrier. And this is while like a show, the song is going on, and so the crowd is all pushing, and I basically had to like push the force of the crowd and the barrier back just enough so that way as I'm like pushing that back and holding the stage, move that subwoofer out just a couple of inches, and then like reach in and slide the thing down. And like, that was like, it was just like,
wow,
I am going to get this. And like, I managed to like drop it in, and then once I released it, everything moved back up. I was like, all right, now I can reach in and get everything down here all set up. And as it timed out perfect, where the moment I put my head inside of it, I was like, I can't see anything. And it was like I had a stroke, and it pulled out. And that's when I realized, like, oh, all the park lights went out, which was not supposed to happen. And so now it's pitch black, and I'm trying to do it completely by feel. Like I'm like feeling around because I don't have my phone or anything. Right. Because it's like that'll get lost in the pit. So it's like, fuck?
Just feel it out.
And just in my head, I'm like, this is taking so long. I rehearsed it so much and it should be good, but it's the live moment.
Yeah.
And so I finally, it's like, oh, thank God, got it all set up. And then, one of the bits was I was supposed to act like I was like pulling candy out of the machine. That's what took me so long. Well, then I go to find like somebody just off stage and grabbed the bag of candy. I was like, shit. I don't know. Does anyone even care at this point? I don't know. But, so I just took my gold spray paint that I was going to like spray the candy with, and I didn't know what else to do. So I started ad-libbing a whole bit where I was like holding the bowl and just like pointing in it. And everyone's like, oh, put some, they thought I was going to give them something. And I kept pointing because I'm like, no, give me something. And finally some girl just reached over and grabbed her friend's hat and put it in there. And I spray painted it gold. And she takes it and her friend is just like, what the fuck? And as soon as the crowd saw that, then everybody just started like putting objects in there, and not like their own. Everyone started this bit where they're grabbing stuff off other people, and I'm spray painting and giving it back to them. And it was like the funniest thing. And then right about that time, we didn't realize that like there were so many different things going on that they ended up needing to like, just because of like the park lights and everything, there was like safety issues. They were trying to tell the little Michael, like, hey guys, you need to like just play one more song and then just sort of wrap it. So they didn't play just one more song. They did like 2 or 3, which in the end, like the No Comply team are like, well, how come you all only did 2 or 3? I was like, nobody told me anything. I didn't know. But they had told Max, but Max was at least doing the songs that had cues.
Right.
Because a lot of the other songs are just songs that, there is no cue associated with them, whereas others, it tells different actors to get ready. And so he wanted to get to the finale, but it's like you need to play these couple songs to get all those parts ready. And so once that happened, then it actually, like, it did work for the better part, because everything was like rushing, and once they started up, I was like, oh fuck, they've skipped a couple more songs. I turned it on and I think it was Shane come through. His whole face was covered in blood. I was like, oh, that shouldn't be happening. And so I ran up, and it turns out that because it was so dark, he had gotten tangled up in the line and like pulled it back to where like it was spraying inside the machine and just pouring down. So he got like waterboarded with fake blood as it got shoved in. And so once I pulled it forward, then it was all working. But, we had also had all those red smoke bombs, because like we had a Michael Jackson puppet that was supposed to come up from hell and seize Johnny. And that all went chaotically too. So in the end, it's just like all these red smoke bombs go off, all this blood spraying, and everyone's like freaking out because I'd made 1,200 water balloons filled with blood, and I gave it to a lot of different people that were going to like just get the audience. So people are just in pitch black, and like you turn and the person next to you gets hit and spattered. And I didn't realize till afterwards that some people were freaking out because, they thought that actually they were being attacked or something. And that's why it's like, because I could see where it's disconcerting if you're in the dark and you're just like, I don't know what's going on. And all of a sudden you just hear a piff, and like you look over and your friend is like dripping with blood. People are like, what the fuck?
Right.
So once everything ended, I remember just like laying in this big puddle of blood, like all this red smoke's around, and just hear like hundreds of people screaming. Some are screaming out of excitement, some fear, some are screaming just to imitate the other screaming.
Right.
You don't know. And it's just like, whoa, what have I done? Like, oops. Sort of thing. Even though it's like, this is the consequences of my actions. Because like, this is pretty much kind of how we figured it would go to an extent. So now I've told the whole story of No Comply, and you asked like about that prop. I don't know. That was a complete like off the rails detour, but
I love that story.
Okay.
knowing that background of that is really awesome. And that moment where you had to like push the barrier. That's insane.
Yeah, it was sheer chaos, but in the best way. So no, it was And it's just all the different props I made, because I did the charred corpse of Kramer. And so that was just something as simple as like getting a plastic skeleton and then doing layer after layer of like some spray paint, some adhesive glue, and just dumping dirt on it and just layering it again to where it eventually looked like just sort of charred flesh. And I put like a prosthetic face on it and melted some clothes to it. I'm trying to think of the other props. The like golden throne that Max was carried in on, I made that out of bamboo that could fold down and be compact. Because originally Max like, I want like a big chair to sit on top of, and I was like, to make that out of wood is going to be heavy.
Yeah.
And not only that, but to get it through the bowl, like that's a small opening. So a lot of it, I guess, maybe in a roundabout way to answer your question is, when ideas are pitched at me, I try not to say yes to anything that I don't have some ideas to how I could do it.
Right.
And then from there, it's like, okay, yes, this is your idea. This is going to be, because there were a couple times where we're like, oh, we're really, like, I know they wanted like the machine to be on stage the whole time and for it to be big. I'm like, guys, I can't do that. Yeah. Like, there's nowhere to store it. And even if it's on stage the whole time, it's going to be in your all's way. So, and you know, for me to be able to transport it too. So it's like, I have to think practical on all that sort of stuff, to be able to like take the abstract idea and be like, okay, here's a way that you could make it, but also more importantly, here's another way that you can make it for cheap. So that way you're not going broke making it. So, I don't know. Yeah, I started out making props and makeup, and that's sort of what led to everything that I got involved with. So it's almost kind of funny that I joke with people, you know, because they'll hear like, "Oh, you're in a band. What do you play?" I'm like, I don't play anything. If anything, it's weird that I guess that I'm like as well known in the music scene as I am, and I don't play an instrument at all. I feel like I'm one of the only people that sort of falls into that category. But I also feel like, you know, I fell into the category of like, I've not met anyone that got into the scene later than I did. Because, you know, I didn't really get into it. I mean, Speedball, I was 34, but really like the story I told earlier, I was 37. And most people, when you hear how they got into the scene, it's like, you know, they were, you know, teenagers or something, and they kind of got into it from there. So it was almost sort of that idea of like, there's that old saying of, you know, the greatest swordsman doesn't fear the second greatest, but they fear the least because that one's unpredictable. It's like when I got involved in the scene, I didn't know that, you know, all this weird theatrical and prop making stuff. It's like, don't people want like shows to be like engaging and entertaining? I didn't realize that like I was doing something different because I didn't know any better. And so because I was so late to the scene, I didn't realize that. And also because I was so late to the scene, I developed all these weird skills to where if I had started out playing music, I might not have ever had time to develop them. So I don't know. It's another one of those like weird fate pathway sort of things.
Yeah, it is endlessly fascinating, like how moments of probability end up shaping our lives. Like when we just make a decision one way or the other, it's almost like this like binary kind of, if I didn't do this, I didn't do this. And so if this, not this, kind of like all the way down the line, that branching kind of probability. It's like, wow, I can't believe I ended up here. But it's easy to think it's almost fatalistic. Like I was meant to do this. I was meant to be where I am. So that's incredible and really inspiring. And yeah, that people get into the punk scene at any age, you know? And so that's what's amazing about the scene too, is how inclusive it is, just across all the spectrum of all things. And it's just a family, and it's a place where people can go and feel accepted.
Yeah. And that's what I like about it. I don't know if you know Jay, aka Mosh Pit Muppet.
I've heard the name. I've probably met them as well.
They're at hardcore shows all the time. They were at the one on Sunday night, and I heard them talking to, I think it was the singer from Crossfire, maybe, and if not, somebody else just talking about how like they like the the hardcore scene because they're like, I don't really fit in, but I feel like I fit in here. And I sort of joked with them because I happened to be standing there. I was like, you don't fit in. You're standing next to the dude who's wearing a shirt and tie and vest at a hardcore show. Like that's a great thing is like nobody fits in, but if everybody's accepted as long as you aren't just like an asshole.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. As long as you come with good vibes, then you're accepted. So I feel like you've mentioned that your work is somewhat inspired by Adult Swim's aesthetic. What specific elements of their style resonate with you?
I don't know. For me, when it comes to like specifically, not so much like my filming or documenting of shows, but like the episodes of the Señor Diablo Show that I edit. A lot of Adult Swim, like say, Check It Out or the Eric Andre Show, they feel like something that would have been on public access in the 80s at like 3 a.m. And you normally would never see it and just, I'm sick, I have a fever, wake up and put on, what's this?
What the heck is going on?
So I liked the idea of doing essentially a documentary series about the scene that has that sort of aesthetic, that like VHS sort of thing.
Public access.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And even to where I would get just weird people that I would like meet to like sit in front of a green screen and be like, talk about whatever. And I'll make like segments around it. And then it's an excuse for me to make music videos for bands, because anytime I've found like bands are like, hey, could you do a music video for us? Usually they're like, we've already got an idea. We just need somebody to film it. It's like, you took the most fun part. The most fun part is making up the idea. So I like being able to, with those, just, fuck it. I'm just going to make a music video for one of your songs. Here you go. Yeah, it's just like, it's not doing it for money. It's doing it because it's like, okay, this is the mental image I have when I hear this song, and I realize it might not be the same as what you have, but this is what it does for me, sort of thing. So it's like it was that, and then just doing interviews with bands to where you don't learn anything about the band, that is sort of an Eric Andre thing, but also with Eric Andre, he is having fun at, and I always want to be having fun with, and that's a fine line to walk.
Right. Yes.
But like, just, I did the interview with Sunshine where we're playing with a Ouija board in like the alley. And they're trying to like resurrect a band, and just every single interview I edit, you don't learn anything about the bands, because I realize I'm like, yeah, I could do how'd you guys get started? How'd you meet? What's your next album? What can you expect? It's all, I'm like, I'm not going to ask you any of that. It's like, instead, I want, when people watch the interviews, to feel like, okay, I didn't learn anything about them, but I feel like I just hung out with them.
Right.
And that, I think, is getting to know people more. Because like, when you ask all those questions of like, what's your next album sort of thing, it's like, that's a question you expect to be asked. And so it's like, you've rehearsed that answer, and it's that same sort of thing about like authenticity. So I feel like with that, as well as like what I would do with Speedball, or even what I do with Little Michael, if you can get people to tap into their like dormant sense of play, you really get to see an authentic version of themselves. And I think shows, even if you aren't like playing pretend, I think just if you're going out and you're just like dancing and play, like that is a form of play. When people are out and they're dancing, like, I get that some people that don't go to like hardcore shows, they see like crowd killing, and it's just like, oh, that looks dangerous. It's like, no, that's a playground. Like that is, and that playground, it has its own rules. And if you don't see the rules, then that playground, that is not meant for you. That they know the rules. So it's like the very fact, it's almost that sort of like unspoken art. Like you'll see kids playing on the playground. It's like, what the fuck game are they playing? It's like, doesn't matter. It matters to them. They know the rules. So to me, it's all the same as like, music taps into that dormant sense of play. And I just like almost using a lot of like what I've learned in terms of like psychology within the classroom and just, the way that you can make students feel psychologically safe. You can replicate that with intentionality with crowds of people. And I used to do that a lot with like when I would develop stage shows with Speedball, is getting people through like different components to feel psychologically safe enough to do whatever the stupid shtick is that I've come up with. And Little Michael's almost the opposite, to where it's like, we know what it takes to make you psychologically safe. We're going to do the opposite. You're still going to come out at the end because it's a haunted house, and it's like, you're safe at the end of the day, but you're going to get messed with a little bit. Right. But I guess backtracking is like, I want to have those interviews to where it's tapping into the band's sense of play for that interview and not giving necessarily answers. And so just, from there, I just kind of like flesh it out. And I think I like when I get to edit Señor Diablo stuff, it's just me having fun with footage that I've shot, and no two have the same format. It's like, I really like the format of this episode. It's like, that's too bad because the next one's going to be completely different. Right. But I find fun in that is I'm not pigeonholing myself into a set format, because it's like, you know what? This format works for the personality of this band or this show or whatever it is in the scene that I'm documenting. It doesn't work for this. And so getting to be able to play around with that. And that's something that's almost like on my forever to-do list, is I do have like stuff that I've shot with all of it, and sitting down and wanting to shoot and edit all that. And then also I kind of accidentally started a new series in the spring that's like my Forbidden series. So that's, it's not, okay, are we allowed to, can we sidetrack?
Yes, of course, please.
So, this goes back to Spinelli's, though. We're going to go like, this is a spirograph conversation. Okay. But you might have seen like some of the photos I posted of the old Spinelli's where I went in and shot some stuff in the building. So I felt comfortable enough being able to like, talk about that and post photos after I got into legal trouble. Then I had to get out of legal trouble because, I was going up to the building with regularity because so many other like punks in the scene were. And the first time I went up there to basically pay reverence to, the remains of Spinelli's, because, had we known that, this is not going to open after the pandemic, I feel like everybody would have gone in knowing this is the last Spinelli show.
Oh my gosh.
But it's like nobody knew. Yeah. And so being able to go in and just for one last time and take some photos, I was like, it just felt nice. And the people I'd come with, they're like, we're just going to be upstairs, exploring, and just text us when you're ready. And so I was down in there probably an hour taking photos. And finally, I texted, where are you all? And the reply came, we're at work. I thought, shit, did they leave me in this building? And I was like, did y'all ditch? And they're like, no, floor 15. Take the elevator. And I was like, what? And I was like, I'm not taking an elevator in a building that's been abandoned for 5 years. Right. So I start going back, exploring like the catacombs behind the Spinelli's kitchen. And it just goes through like, you come out and it's like this old like 1920s bank. Like my brain broke because I'm like, how is this thing on the opposite side of this thing? Right. And then I walked up to the first floor and there's like this 4-story tall atrium with all these old columns and stuff. And I was like, this just keeps going. And eventually the text, it's like, where are you at now? I was like, oh, I'm on the 3rd floor. And Hawthorne came down and got me and was just like, take the elevators. It's quicker. And I was like, yeah, all right. You only yellow once. Sure. And that right there, you talk about filming at a hardcore show. There's a compare with the adrenaline of riding in that elevator and just like every sound and creak, and realizing, oh, if we die, we're not getting discovered for days, type thing. But went upstairs, and it turns out that on that floor of the old building, so that entire building used to be basically law offices, and so a lot of the different punks in the scene who'd gotten their start at Spinelli's went over to pay respects. And then discovered, oh, there's 21 more floors. It's all abandoned. And not only that, but it's like everyone just packed up and left when the pandemic started. So all the desks, furniture, people's photos of their families, all still sitting there.
Wow.
Everything. It was this most post-apocalyptic thing you'd ever seen, because you just wander through and just all the offices were still furnished. Mm. Like everyone had just gone home yesterday. And I was like, this is weird. Wow. And that's when I discovered it got even weirder, because all these different musicians who'd gone up for that had moved furniture to create fake businesses. And they made fake memos that they would trade back to each other. They had fake hours, or they had real hours they would keep at their fake businesses. So at any given night, you could go up there at 1 a.m. and go up to that floor, and someone would be at work. They'd be sitting there, and I'm like, there's nothing more punk than getting off work and going to an abandoned building to pretend you're a white collar worker.
Cosplay white collar worker.
Yeah, it was weird. And so I was like, this is fascinating. And of course, being the documentarian, I'm like, I've never seen this. I'm probably never going to see this again. Mm-hmm. And similar to the house show effect, I'm like, this is temporary. This will not last. And so I just started filming people at work. I would just go up there with regularity, and just whoever was there, I would just film. And sure enough, if you were in your office and I came walking in, he'd be like, oh, Bo, I've been expecting you. Please have a seat. They would role play at all times. It was like, this is great. And it's all these members of bands that you grew up seeing at Spinelli. So it's like, what a weird sort of thing. And so I took all the footage I shot, and I've been making, because I didn't want to put them online until after, the whole legal stuff cleared up. But now it's I want to go ahead. I don't want to have a ton of episodes. I'm thinking 6. And I'm halfway through a third of, basically it's you're watching corporate training videos for a company that never existed. It's still got that 80s vibe. But I wanted to almost break away and be meta, because, it's the first episode is, how do you get hired? The second episode is, your first day. The third episode is, cooperation in the workplace. It's those sorts of things. And I just took whatever they were doing and edited to it. But eventually it's okay, quitting. How do you quit? And that's when I wanted to start getting meta. Have you seen Over the Garden Wall?
I have.
Okay. So very much in that vein, to where I think it's the 7th episode, where now they're not in that world at all. You see them on that Halloween that leads to, and it's oh, it makes sense. That's why they're wearing the outfits they are. And, they're in purgatory, almost. Before you get to the soul crushing 8th episode, that I was like, oh, that destroys me every time I rewatch that series. Oh, yeah. So, my friend Dave, he basically curated the Vogue Theater exhibit at the Speed Art Museum, because when the Vogue closed in 98, he was a worker there all throughout the 80s, and it was a special place to him. So he has a lot of artifacts left over from it. And I wanted to sort of shift where suddenly you're talking to him, and you're talking to him about how do you quit a place in time, a location, because so many people hang on to like a part in their past that they don't want to let go. It's like they're forever trying to relive, their 20s or whatever it is. Like I work with people, especially in a high school, to where it's like you could tell the best years of their lives when they were like a senior in high school, which is sad. But so many people do it. They hang on to places in time. And I thought, what if then that's when you start realizing this whole series you've been watching, it turns into a documentary about like, why was Spinelli significant? How did these punks discover this? Why did they start doing this? Because the last time they went up there, I did interview them on like, why'd you start doing this? So it's like I got them to break character to be able to like, hey, step out of character for a second. Why? And so then kind of getting in with my friend where it's like he's been curating this, closed theater stuff for 25 years. It's like, can you quit a place? And so that's what it kind of turns into. I wanted to kind of finish off with is like that meta, like it's no longer about, how do you quit? Even though it still works in that context, but it's also about like, hey, you all coming in here and playing pretend at this old Spinelli's building. It can't last forever. And it didn't. It was only really like a 2.5 month window at best. So how do you know when to quit that sort of thing? So that's sort of what I've been like working on project wise, where it's like, yeah, I've got some stuff for Señor Diablo Show episodes I want to edit, but that's the thing that I've been having fun with. And it's something where I almost feel like it has a wider appeal because the Diablo Show, if you aren't part of the Louisville music scene, it can seem like very in-jokey, whereas this, it's like, you don't need to know anything about the Louisville music scene to be like, this is weird. Like these people are in what is clearly an abandoned building, but it's like, is it though? Like the space is a character in of itself. So
that is fascinating. I had no idea that was going on. And I spent a lot of time there. A lot of people, have lots of memories there. And so, yeah, that'll be fascinating to watch. Is the Forbidden Tapes? Is that
I call them the Tacit Tapes.
The Tacit Tapes.
Yeah, because Tacit Core was the name of one of the fake businesses on that floor.
Gotcha.
So, it's named after that. But it's like you had Tacit Core, you had, let's see, there's Tacit Core, Eggshme, let's see, I think Atlas was Atlas Enterprises. I think Eggshme was just Eggshme Incorporated. You had Bitchwater LLC. Like they were all these fake. Yes.
That's a good one.
They were all these, and even there was some painting that somebody had found of probably some founder for a business on a different floor, and they had like used a lighter to like burn out the eyes. And it's like that was Saint Bitchwater. Like it was they created all this fake lore, and they would just exchange memos back and forth between. So I was like, this is bizarre. And the whole time it's like you're in this building and it's so cool because there was no heat and this was a cold winter. So there's some days where you're going up there and everybody's just like, it's 10 degrees. And it's just like, have a seat. It's just,
have this on my desk by Monday.
Yes. It's like, I could go home and be in bed, but I got to pretend to be at work.
Got to do the old 9 to 5.
Yeah.
My shift's almost over. Just got a few more hours.
And all of a sudden, it's just like, this job. And they pull out like a handle of like bourbon.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then they're dead. Like all the bits were there. No missed marks. And I was just like, this is wild. And the power was still on though.
Wow.
Because the first time I went up there and they were on that floor, they had all the lights on. And I was like, you aren't worried that somebody's going to look in? But then they pointed out, I said, if you were driving down the street, would you look up and see someone in here and think something was wrong? I was like, no, actually, no.
Nope.
So that's where, they realized, it's just it. So I actually, because I was going up there so often, and I got so used to people being there, like that's what bit me in the butt because I don't know if you've read the book Access All Areas. it is written by an urbexer who went by Ninjalicious, and it's considered like the holy Bible of urban exploration. So like exploring abandoned spaces, and it's got like a lot of really good just like life advice in it. Like, one of the ones I like that he talks about is he says, never go on an urban exploration adventure with someone whose reactions you cannot anticipate. And I'm like, that's just good life advice. Yeah. Like, don't travel with people whose like way of reacting or responding to situations you can't anticipate.
Yeah.
But one of them was, he's like, the people that you should be mindful of are the ones that when they go into an abandoned space, they aren't afraid. Because you should always have a certain degree of apprehension about walking into an abandoned space, because there could be danger, there could be security, you never know. So, the one time I was up there and I was like shooting some photos because I was slowly going through and like trying to document every single room just through photography. And I was taking pictures, and it just happened to be a day that, apparently the building maintenance was going to work on the leaking pipes. So I just heard voices coming through, and I almost expected to see like one of the usual crew walking through. Because in my mind, I thought, okay, if police are coming through, they're going to be like, police, is there anybody in there? That's what I thought. Turned out to be wrong. So they came in. As soon as they walked in, I was just like, oh. And all three of them just like pulled their guns out. And I'm just like, I'm just taking photos. And it went from like 0 to 11. I don't know, in no time, because it's just like, hurry, what are you doing? I'm just like, I'm an arty nerd. I'm taking photos. And they're just like, why shouldn't we arrest you for burglary? I'm like, I'm not here to steal copper. I'm just, we'll turn around and just hands against the wall, emptying all the pockets. And, they just go over and start dumping stuff out of the bag, look through the bag, which there was that part of my brain where it's like, you didn't consent to any of this. Like, they're going through your stuff without, but,
Yeah.
But there's also that other part of the brain where it's like, okay, you've got guns on you, and you are in a basement of an abandoned building, and no one in your friend group knows you're here. And so it is just you and them. And if something goes wrong, they will control the narrative as to what happened. So shut up.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much how I kind of like treated it for that. And so like, for the better part, like I just kind of sat there and I tried to explain, because they're like, what are you even doing down here? Like taking pictures of what? I'm like, oh, and I tried to explain, like the one time I talked the most, I tried to explain like the significance of spinellis, and they're like, that doesn't make any sense. I was like, well, no. Have you never had like some place you wish you could like spend 5 more minutes at, et cetera? And they're just like, no, what are you really doing here? It's like, I was like, oh, all right, I'm going to, it doesn't fucking matter.
That. Yeah.
It's like, what is crime? Fill in crime.
Yeah.
And so, that's where, as they were, even when they were escorting me out, there were a couple of moments because they wouldn't believe that I was like taking photos for some reason. And then they were about to walk me out, and the guy's like, oh, hang on. He's like, this is really cool. He's like taking pictures with his phone. It's like, dude, you don't believe me, but you're taking photos. And then I even asked, I said, can I take my lights? And they're like, oh, these yours? Because it was all those colored gel lights.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there were no lights in there. I said, yeah, these are all mine. These are not, there's not like an old bank vault sitting around with like neon pink and green lighting on it 24/7. So I get my lights, and that's when I was like, I'm going to turn this last one off. Then it's going to be dark in here. And they're like, okay. And they turn on their flashlights, and I was like, all right. And so they're like leading me out by flashlight. And the one that's like escorting me from behind doesn't have a flashlight. And so the other two that have the flashlights go around a corner, and an officer's like, hey, stop, come back. And they come running around, and they're like reaching again. They're like, what? And they're like, and the officer's like, oh, you all have the flashlights. I couldn't see anything. And they're like, oh, we thought he was running. I'm like, I'm
right here.
I'm not going anywhere.
Right.
And finally I like got escorted out to the street level, and that's when I was like, oh thank God, like I'm around people. And to me, like that very much illustrated, and an aspect where it's like, not that I had a huge amount of trust to begin with, but the very fact that it's like, seeing, oh, I'm just holding a camera in a basement. And I was dressed, like this. And it's like, if you escalated for something like over that, it's like, I can't imagine in other scenarios. But it ended up like, it's like, even though it was like, oh, it's second degree trespassing is like what I got cited for. It ultimately ended up getting thrown out because I was able to show because if you're sitting here wondering like, oh, if I'd wanted to go into that building, how could you have gotten in? How might you think? If you had to speculate.
Doors open.
Yeah. The street level doors were open. Like they were just sitting unlocked all the time.
Break and enter. You just entered.
And that's the thing is like, for it to be second degree, you had to have like gone around some sort of like barrier or something. And in third degree is like, there's just indicators that you're trespassing, but it's like, there were no fences. There were no sign. Now there is. But at the time it's like, no, there were no signs, no fences. The street level doors were unlocked. Anybody could have walked in at any point in time. That's how like all these people were going in. It's just like one day somebody just decided to try the door. And so the building sat there unlocked and no security or anything for years. And that's one of the other things that like Access All Areas talks about is it's like so many of our barriers that we have in our life, we've constructed ourselves. Because if you're walking to anywhere downtown, you might walk even by and think, oh, between when it closed in 2020 and now, it's like thinking maybe, have you been by it and thought, oh, old Spinelli's, I wonder what's in here or something. And realizing at any point you could have just gone and opened up that door and gone in. Wow. Like but in your brain you thought, no, this building's closed. I can't go in. Right. And so, I don't know. It's just, we do that so often in our life as we create barriers for ourselves. Like one time I was trying to explain like the allure of, urban exploration, really with like educators, because that's something that I've done a couple of urban exploration workshops with teachers to where Hawthorne comes in and talks about it, because I do these like workshops that are designed to like reinforce like creativity and curiosity in educators, because I'm always hearing educators like, oh, kids these days, they aren't curious, they aren't creative. And that's where I have to be like, research shows that they're modeling what they see. If they don't see adults asking questions and being curious and creative, they lose that. And how many adults don't have it? So it's meant to kind of reinstill within adults. And so that's where I bring in like outside guests to talk about stuff with educators, and for them to kind of dabble in it that they have no background in or probably don't. And so Urbex was one I felt like was far enough out there for educators. But even talking with teachers and saying, okay, how many years have you taught in this building? 10 years. Have you ever been in that classroom? It's like, no. It's because they come in and go in the parking lot, go into their classroom, maybe go to the lounge or something. Nothing. You can legally go into that room. It's the same as people who work in, maybe an office building where it's like, oh, there's other businesses or other floors. How many years have you worked there? And you've never gone to one of the other floors other than the one that you work on. There's no rules that say that you can't do it, but you've created a barrier. And so that's kind of where that like Spinelli's building, that unlocked door, essentially there is no barrier. That's not even by law at that point trespassing, because there's been no indication you're not breaking or anything. Because the only other exception is if you go in there, then somebody needs to be able to tell you, hey, get out, sort of thing. And, if you fail to leave, then it gets more into that third degree thing. And this is all stuff I didn't like even know until like I got in trouble for it. But no, it is that idea of just, and that's where I kind of try to use that with teachers. Just, it's like we get meta on that too, is like, how many barriers do you put in terms of like what you can't do in the classroom with students? because a lot of them, they want to teach the way that they were taught.
Right.
And, the downside of that is a lot of teachers are, for lack of a better phrase, institutionalized. They keep perpetuating a system that worked for them, but didn't work for like the other 98% around them. And so in their brain, they teach the way that they were taught because they don't know any better. They're imitating a model that didn't work for the majority. And they're hesitant to change that because there's this idea of like, oh, if suddenly I could drastically change the way that I educate, somehow it devalues the degrees that I got as a result of it, sort of thing. So it's like that combined with just wanting to talk about a subject, and that is your primary focus rather than the students. It kind of broaches on hubris, but I've opened up a lot of doors. I suddenly realized in this hallway of conversation, because I'm like, how did this even start? That was when I used to have students in the classroom. I always had like one student in each class where I said, who's reliable and can be volunteers? I need 2 volunteers. One is if you see me wandering around looking clueless, I'm probably looking for something. I sat down, just be like, Mr. Kalen, are you looking for fill in the blank? You put it over there. I'll be like, okay, thank you. Mm-hmm. And I need somebody else if I stop and I'm like, wait, where am I at? And that's where you can be like, somebody asked you this. That's how this. I'm like, oh, that's right. It's like, well, I don't care about student aids taking grading. Those 2 things. So
you get the same way as well.
Yeah.
I love what you said. You had the urban explorer from just like something an urban explorer like wrote about barriers that we set for ourselves, like just going from that to it being, you can apply that to all sorts of things in your life is awesome. And like, not just like with, other places in our lives that we're like, oh, I can never go there because I feel like I can't, but also those barriers can be ones we put in front of people in our lives. It's like, oh, I could never talk to them because like they I don't know, they're too cool for me, or like I'm too scared to talk with them because we'd have nothing in common or something like that. Or, barriers on even music we listen to. It's like, oh, I could, that's, I feel like we did do that at a younger age, but some people, keep going with that like ideology going in their lives. Like I can never listen to metal because like it's just screaming music and it's scary. And it's like, I could never even see how I'd want to have any part of that until you give it a chance. And you're like, oh, this is like therapeutic. Oh my goodness. But yeah, that's super interesting. And, I think there's a few photographers, perhaps listening to this that I know of that would love to listen to that book or read that book because that sounds pretty incredible. Like really great advice. It's great when something is like, this is for this niche activity or hobby, but also works in life advice into it as well. It
backs out and it's sort of universal.
Like I can superimpose this on like multiple parts of my life and it still work.
Mm-hmm. And that's even something where like a lot of the work that I do, like I started out very specific as a biology teacher, but now I just try to back out and just approach stuff as, education or shifting mindsets in general. Cause, like, I don't know if you saw, I recently had a whole Louisville graffiti crew come into my school. And that was something where it's like, I couldn't just do that overnight. Like you kind of have to build that like rapport over time. With your school and with your school leaders and stuff to where if, I'm like, yes, these people have been arrested for what I'm bringing them into school to do. And they are going to be talking to, students about that sort of stuff. But being able to at least attach like the curricular strength to it to where it is that idea of like, we're addressing biases. Cause, even I went in and like, before I had them come in as guests, talking with students, it's like, okay, bringing in some folks that are going to be artist guests. They are graffiti artists. And so, talking with students, like as soon as I said that phrase, graffiti artist, you've never met these people, but you already have an image in your head as to like, how old are they? How do they dress? How do they talk? All this sort of stuff just from that phrase. It's like we've got so many biases attached. And so the purpose of it is, it's like, I want you to just take the time to kind of reflect and think, like, what questions do you have that you can ask? Because they're going to be able to answer pretty much anything. And so it's like, because really the whole focus around that was around a rhetorical analysis unit, trying to help students before they go out into the world build a toolbox of like, hey, don't just accept, something, be it politics or whatever, like what somebody tells you, like go direct to the source, be able to, like you said, be open to talking to people that you think you wouldn't necessarily have anything in common with. Because to me, being able to build skills like that with students is way more important than like, where you need to put a semicolon in a sentence. So, it was a combination of that, as well as the other big meta thing was while they were out doing like this whole graffiti wall, I also collaborated with the art teacher, and like her students were coming out because a lot of art students, a lot of artists in general, they find their style that they like, and it's like, all right, I'm just going to kind of like create pieces. And so like students will go into art classes all the time and be talking with whatever, but they're always doing their little piece in their corner at their table, and that's it. And so the art teacher is like, I need them to see creative, artistic collaboration, because that is tough for students in high school worlds to see. Like, it's hard enough to get some to create, but to see like, this is what creative collaboration looks like. And so for her, she brought the students out, and basically before they asked any questions, she just told them like, just be quiet and listen to them for 10 minutes. And sure enough, when graph artists are like working on any kind of like big piece, it is just this, what the fuck is that T supposed to be? Like they're constantly like, it is nothing but constant feedback. And then when they're all working, they're basically acting like multiple hands on the same piece of work, because they've like communicated so much that they're on each other's wavelength. And that is such a high level, form of collaboration that, to me is astonishing. So it's like being able to get students, even almost some teachers, to be like, look at how adults that you might be judgmental of, they collaborate way better than y'all do when you're trying to figure out curriculum. So it's like, I'm always trying to think like abstractly when it comes to, same with like urbex. It's like, yes, this is this niche thing. Same with like graffiti, but at the end of the day, it is creative collaboration, and it is artistic communication in a way. So it's like stepping back and looking at that big picture to be able to like bring these worlds together. And that's where, I feel like I'm very lucky to have the boss that supports me doing stuff like that. Where it's like, oh yeah, here's a few $100 on spray paint. Bring your graph artist friends in. It's like, all right. Wow. Even though I had to talk to them and be like, y'all can talk about whatever, you can answer whatever questions you feel comfortable with. Just don't say anything that makes it seem like you're encouraging students to go out and do it, because you have to maintain those barriers. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I also had to kind of like prep the staff, because some teachers, they want to come in and make up arbitrary rules to just enforce. So I had to be like, hey, if as adults, you got something against this, these are my homies. They are artist guests, regardless of what you think about what they do. Mm-hmm. So, because I didn't want like some adult trying to like, hyperfix it and like try to supervise, to try to find, these graph artists doing something that, would like, I saw this graph, they snuck into the restroom and vaped, sort of like crap. And none of that ended up happening, but still that was sort of my worry on the other end. Cause it's like, okay, I try to, it goes back to that idea of like, it's a delicate balance to be able to bring guests like that in, but it is something that I try to do more and more, just because, again, I think that getting people to step back away from content and just build those skills of just like talking and learning from other things like that's part of why I've just gotten involved in so many different things. I'm like, that's fascinating. Like, I'm always just in that mindset of like, that's fascinating. I want to learn more about that. And there's always some bigger takeaway from that niche thing, if you just kind of step away and look at it from that like mountaintop view.
Yeah, like there's surface level, when perhaps the other teachers or people just see like what they know about graffiti is when they're driving on the highway and they see it on the signs and like, oh my gosh. But there's also that part. It's like, how do they get up there? Like there's, even if you like really, the kind of shake your fist at, but those kids spray paint, there's also got to be that part where like, how did they get up there? Like, that's really impressive. And like, did they like hang off that? And like, it actually looks really good if they had to like, be on a ladder. It's like, that's pretty impressive.
And somebody cares enough about that artistic expression and they're passionate enough about it to risk going to jail over it, knowing that tomorrow it could be painted over.
Yeah.
Like wow. That is a level of, artistic passion that you don't see in many other like art forms. I mean, about the closest is like when I've been to shows that, somebody came by and shut down and they kept playing. And I was like, oh, here we go. I'm going to keep filming this whole thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm not walking right now. Everybody else might be like, I'm going to go.
Yeah.
But I'm like, no, I'm going to film this till it's in.
Yeah.
Because that's when I love it. Because that's when it's like, all right, no, fuck it. This is what we're here about.
Yes.
So that was my introduction to like, the Black Forces crew. Because Derek and Braden used to be in Rat Piss. And the first time they played Louisville, like LMPD showed up and shut them down. And then just recently, like that happened at Iroquois Park. And it's always these things happen at like public parks. At least that when I've been there, when they've got shut down, everyone kept playing during non-noise ordinance hours. And it's a public space.
Yeah.
But it's just somebody who has more money than you, who has like their alderman or something on speed dial. It's just like, I just don't like this.
I'm just not feeling this today.
Yeah.
These kids, organized this and like had weeks of promotion beforehand, and they had worked hard making their set list and practicing and getting carpools together to drive over there. It's just all these endless things to where somebody can pick up a phone and be like, I'm trying to watch my stories on the TV and I don't want to just turn the volume up a bit or wear headphones, or I just kind of hear it in the background.
And they're like, I mean, they technically can be there, but what are they going to do? Get a lawyer? And I'm sure that's probably goes through their head too. It's like, no, those kids are going to get a lawyer. They're just going to run away. So I'm gonna take advantage of that, which is kind of shitty, because it's like how wholesome those shows are, and to just be able to be like, nah, fuck it, I want these kids to be scattered to the wind and get in trouble in 20 different spots in the city instead of being here for music. Well, but I don't know. Some people are squares.
Yeah. What do you hope people will understand about Louisville's music scene through your work?
Ooh. I don't know that I've thought that through a lot, to be quite honest. I almost like, to me, it is, I know myself and where I'm at any given time, and I can sometimes see, like, when it comes to, like, episodes of the Diablo Show and that, like, what I'm working through. I would hope, if anything, just that sense of community, because I think community is so valuable. And from talking with artists from other cities, apparently, like, that isn't as common from what I understand. Like, Mr. Clit and the Pink Cigarettes, they talk about how they come down here so often because they're like, there's not a scene like this in Indianapolis. I've heard that from people who come from Cincinnati. They're like, oh no, it's not like that. Even there was a hardcore band that played last night from Knoxville, Tennessee, and they're like, and even though they're like, there weren't that many people, but they're like, still, there's a vibe here that's not in our scene. So, if anything, hoping that people get the idea of like the strength of the community that we have. Because that is something that, I never really set out for. It's bad. Like I just started documenting. I never had like a goal in mind. It's just more like, I'll keep doing this. But I've had people come and tell me like specific things that I never would have like thought it has the impact of. Like, I think it was Jeremy Rockman with Anemic Royalty made the comment one time, because they've gone up to New York, like done little loop tours a couple times. And he said that whenever they're in any other city, someone's always like, oh, what's your scene like? It's a natural thing. And he said that the advantage of the channel is he can be like, oh, here, just subscribe and see. Like, it's like show, not tell. Whereas a lot of other music in cities, there's not that like, oh, here's the I'm sure there might be like some sort of Indianapolis channel. Like, I don't know how well, like, even what I do is known outside of this area. It might not be at all. I don't know. Because I'm always looking for like, what are the other me's in other cities? Is like what I do uncommon, or is there a me for every scene in every city? I don't really know. But I would hope that, people can pick up that community, because I know that's what community, because that's what Jeremy Rockman said that, they'll do, is they'll be like, here, just look. And people can see like, oh, here's all this community stuff. Because I'm not just on the bands. Like, a lot of the time my camera turns around and it's not only recording the pit, but some people might be having like a goofy little conversation, and I'll film that between because I'm like, this is the moment, it's not just the music only. Like, oh, these people playing like patty cake in the pit. Like, I'm filming that instead of the band, because I'm like, this is fun. Like, because sometimes people will create these like goofy little games just at this one show in the pit. I'm like, all right, I'm filming this. So it's like, hopefully seeing that. And also that maybe like us as a community, like the more we are a community, the more we recognize that we make each other stronger too. Because I think that's just communities in general is, the more that you kind of like tie yourselves together, the stronger you become. That almost makes it like, I've talked about that recently, to where it's like, I have noticed more police like coming and breaking up house shows. And, I feel like anytime that like, just people in general, but even like creative or artistic people, like they start like really starting to get together and getting to be a big force, like it becomes intimidating to folks who are like, no. So I hopefully at least that it's like helping connect more people, and people feel connected through all of that. Because Reeves Oten with formerly of Sunshine and now like with Xeon said that for him, he likes putting on the channel because he doesn't go out to enough shows. And he's like, I not only like seeing what's going on, but he's like, for me, I'll just maybe scroll through a lot of your recent videos and see what some of the people are doing. And I'm like, fuck, I need to practice. Because I see, he's like, it's the difference between, oh, I'm going to like work out and get in shape, and I'm just working by myself in a basement, versus, hey, me and some friends are all going to join a gym together. It's like, now the pressure is on to where it's like everybody can see each other. So that's something else I never would have thought about. But I don't know. It's weird to me to almost step back and think like stuff like with No Comply. Like, if I hadn't filmed it, it's like, what, there'd maybe be a few clips, but that's about it. Like, I almost think it's weird to think of all the awesome stuff that's happened in the scene and it not being documented,
Yeah.
So no, that's kind of what I would like hope people would get out of it, because that's even with the Diablo show. When I first started out, it was almost just sort of like a Speedball's only playing like once a year, so maybe I'll film like some practices and some hijinks. And then it turned into, oh, well, maybe I'll do like a little guest interview with the band that we're playing with. And then by the time really you get to like the third season, because season is loose, I'm just like, I'm going to cap it here. So like seasons 3 through 5, now it's pretty much just like the scene where the camera's just drifting back and forth between people and places. And yeah, just hopefully people kind of like getting that cohesion out of all this. I don't know.
Yeah, I think from my experience, you know, not every scene does have a documentarian, but for the ones that do, and I can only think of maybe one or two others that I found where somebody's just like really at every show, and there's this one scene in it's Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and we've performed there a few times, and it's quite a small town, and but their state government or city government lets them use the Parks and Recreation Center as the venue, and they just hand the kids the keys and be
that's great.
Lock it up by 10 o'clock and don't burn it down, you know, and throw your shows there. We just want to make sure you're having it at a safe place. And they still have house shows there. We played at the Parks and Rec Center. We played at people's homes before there, but they have this like archival, the guy who does archiving for them has it all on VHS tapes.
No kidding.
And there's like a bunch of them like there's like a TV CRT setup, and so they can, and they'll just watch through all the tapes and just like reminisce and be like, wow, yeah, remember that? And that
does he
crazy.
Still document like when you all come through?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So it was really inspiring to see just like people, you know, going through all the old tapes and just like in their own time. And there's also aspects of it that, you know, you don't think of maybe as an archivist of like what the bands are doing. Like when like someone's just like, oh, I just didn't get to go to that show. I need to watch this to catch up, but also be motivated, as you said, by, oh, I need to practice more, like they're killing it. I need to, and, you know, kind of look at their setup too and be like, oh, I see they have this setup, like, or their pedal board is like chained up this way. Maybe I could emulate that somehow. But not only that, like I've actually used your live capture of sets that I've done to kind of practice. And I've like, I take the audio out, and I would like strip out the background sound and take out my guitar only, and keep like bass and drums and vocals in, and then practice along with it as like a method of like actually performing, and like
that's really cool
to practice like and to anticipate kind of what happens in those live settings, because I record practices a lot, but they're just it's totally different vibe than that live perform. You know, you can practice all you want,
but your practice space, it's a controlled environment.
It's totally controlled, totally like stagnant environment. Everything's just like a certain way, and then when you move all the equipment and put it in a place and like hook it all in, you're like, this sounds completely different. Like you're not anticipating, you just have to
you're
go.
Like, can I get more bass in my monitor? That's all it'll give.
We're at 11,
but I can't even hear him. It's at the top.
All right, just hum it. And so I've done when I remember, you know, when I was a kid, I would if I couldn't hear myself, I would hum it in my head. And if it was like a bass part, it's like I just like I could hum it so along with what I was playing, so at least I could hear something along with the drums. And or just, you know, in some of those situations, you just go off just the snare drum hit. You know, like the only thing that's keeping you on time is when that snare drum's hitting, like, and that drummer, just God bless them, they just got to be locked in and just play it. Yeah,
that's where you're like, please let me have a metronome. Yeah,
right, exactly.
Like your best drummers function just as that. Yeah, as opposed to it's like, oops, they're drunk and they overslept again. Like it's one or the other. They're either like a human machine, or are they going to show up?
Right, exactly.
No in between. You get one or the other.
But not many scenes do have a documentarian. I think is it's beneficial in every way possible. I feel like, you know, and from even if a band has like a bad show, they're like, we can learn from this, you know, and like, what did we like? I'll definitely look at sets that I've played before and be like, okay, what did we do wrong here? What did I do wrong here? Like, maybe we should switch a cue up or something. And it's just it's a really beneficial service that you provide.
I appreciate it.
It's very much appreciated. And I was wondering, since I really don't think there are many people who do this kind of documentarian work for their scenes.
Mm-hmm.
So from somebody who looks at the work you do and is inspired by what you're doing and wants to be that person for their community, what advice would you give somebody who wants to pick up a camera and just start going to shows and documenting?
I mean, I would just say, just do it, because there's a lot of times where it's like, yeah, I might get out of my comfort zone because it's like, I don't know anybody here. But that's where that gets into that idea of the barriers that we talked about earlier, to where so many people don't want to go to another show because like, I'm not going to know anybody there. But it's like, you might, that's how you meet people. You might see something awesome. And for me, just doing it, I mean, I try not to be biased about it. So it's like, if you're going to go in, like, go all in. So it's like in the past week, it's like I saw, hardcore, punk, bluegrass, R&B, swing, like almost every genre you can think of, from like big, huge packed shows with LDB to, oh, this person's playing acoustic guitar on their porch. Like but it's all one and the same. It's still people like expressing themselves. And I always feel kind of bad when I go to shows and it's like, I'm the only person there documenting. Because there are some shows I'll go to and it's like, oh my God, the whole front row is nothing but photographers. And then there are other shows I go to and the band is like, oh, thank you for being here. And it's like, and like, there's like, if any, like say for example, just recently I went to, I was talking with a photographer at the Destructo Disc show at Camp Spaceman. And, they're like, where did you end up landing last night? And I said, I went to the She album release at Magbar. And because, I fucking love She. I love like all the weird, funky stuff that, they'll do on bass and that with it that you wouldn't expect with a, like sort of a doom metal band to do. I was the only photographer there. I was like, it's a shame that I'm like, there needs to be more people like checking out the metal scene, and I see that like when I was at the bluegrass show on Tuesday, same sort of deal. It's like so I guess that would be my other thing is don't just go to the big shows. Cause I see that with a lot of the scene photographers is, they'll go to the no complies of the year, which I get it. Those are cool, but it's like, don't just seek those out, because if you're ignoring all the other ones, those big ones won't happen. Like you need to support the others. And then I guess my other thing too is just, do it for the right reasons. Cause, I'm not going out to like make a buck. If anything, it's like, no, I usually spend about $100 a week on like doors and stuff to go to these, but it's like, it's important. So it's like, don't treat it as like, this is my foot in the door to be able to like, get paid to do this for a living. It's like, just do it just because you want to do it, not because it's like an angle to do something else. And I guess just my own is like, to try and take risks and find what works for you. Cause I mean, like I mentioned earlier, yeah, I recognize like the way that I shoot is not the way that it, in some cases it's done. Cause certain genres of music are shot certain way, like, for example, like with hardcore, it's like, yeah, I know if I'm going to like really shoot it the way it's shot, you keep it a little more level. And it's like, I can maybe do a little handheld shaky and I can rack focus between like subjects. Cause it's like, that's the style. And it's like, do almost like the quick little flash cuts when you edit. Like, I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm like, it's more fun to do what I like doing though.
Yeah.
So, if anything, by doing that, I also realize like, I'll see bands, even bands that like have just come through and played like a random Wednesday night. and I'll be following on Instagram, and next thing it's like, oh, we're going on tour again, and they'll have like montages. I'm like, oh, that sticks out like a sore thumb. That's mine. Because it's just that wild sweeping. But I'm like, they liked it enough to use it. So, okay. So it's like, do your own thing, I think. Because I, like with Hate 5-6, I didn't even find out about that till like maybe 2 years ago. Because there was like a meme going around.
You know the one. We all know the one.
Yeah. So that's how I was like, wait, who's this? Because I'm so out of the loop. And then I liked looking at it to kind of figure out like, oh, here's some, if anything, I like how they've kind of got their archive sort of structured in that. But then, to me, it's like, I don't want to just imitate that because, he films pretty much largely hardcore. And, for the better part, it's also like a lot of like really big bands, which is really cool. But I'm like, I kind of like, oh, you played for 20 people, in your basement. I don't know what genre this is supposed to be, but it's cool that you're trying. Yeah. So it's like, I like documenting, I always kind of look at it as like David Attenborough, will go around and he'll do these episodes like this species only exists in this tide pool at this time of year. Yeah. It's like there are so many different bands and musicians that exist like that in our scene. And so it's like trying to find those. And it's like I'm always even trying to get better to find those. But yes, I still will go to like the No Complies too. But it's like, I mentioned earlier that show at Portal where it's like there's 12 people. It's important you're at that. Because, it's like those bands appreciate you being there. Because, like, two of the bands I'd never heard of beforehand, one from Louisiana, one from New Hampshire. They're both just crisscrossing as they go on tour. But both of them were like, oh, thank you. Like, the one band in Louisiana has just been using, like, video clips of that ever since for, like, promo videos. And then the one in New Hampshire is like, this is cool. Could we have this to, like, put on VHS? I was like, yeah, here, drop it in Google Drive, take it. But I'm not doing it for money. Here, have fun. Yeah. And so both seemed to dig it. And it's like, had I not been there on that Tuesday night and been one of those 12, it's like,
all that material.
So it's, I don't know. But also don't wear yourself out because I'm bad about that sometimes. Even though now I'm bound and determined, I should be able to reach 502 this year in the 502. That's my goal.
Yes, absolutely.
That's my goal. I think I can do it because I've got only like 60 bands left, which, most of the time at shows, it's 4 bands. So you're talking like 15 shows between now and the end. I'm like, oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's, but then also when I said, I'm like, oh, that's a lot, especially because I like want to edit that together. But when I edit, I'm like, just like when I did that, I don't know if you got a chance to see the 2023 year in review. I did the 3-part series.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Just going through every show I shot last year to make one montage. I loved that, but I'm like, it's when you pick those editing scabs, like, because I never turn the camera off. Like I never, you mentioned like going back and like those nostalgia, Hawthorne and Jack Foldina and some of the other were over at my house one time and talking about Spinelli's. And I was like, yeah, I never turned the camera off. And they're like, so wait, you just have a bunch of footage of you just wandering around Spinelli's? Like, yeah, from every single show I went to. And so like, I was bringing that up on the external and it's just me, the camera's on the whole time. It's like, I'm just going around talking to people and it's like, and they're like, oh, that's so-and-so. Oh, that's like they're recognizing everybody. And it's just like, no, it's like your POV, you're back there again. Cause I'm just walking around holding the camera, like, cause digital's cheap. So I just pretty much as soon as I got somewhere, I turned it on, let it roll the whole time and then shut it off unless I'm really trying to conserve battery. But yeah.
Wow. Imagine like a future where archivalists, with the evolution of technology can maybe just wear, some glasses that give a 360 view or have like the 360 camera on to where future generations, when they want to see like how a punk scene was or how a certain venue was or a certain show, and somebody could be wearing that and they could put almost like a VR headset on and like have a 360 view and just like be really immersed in what that moment was like, you know. And it's already amazing that you keep that, you know, it's not just the classic, you know, people do full sets. It's just like stagnant camera on the stage. And there's so many times I've seen shows like that were filmed. I was like, I wish they would show the audience just once, and I'll skim through. Never once just showed the audience. Like, oh man, I just really wanted to see what the crowd was like how they were feeling, because you get so much information when you look at a crowd. I think there's some footage. I'm not sure if it was from you or another person who had taken some shots, but there's just like somebody, like it was like multiple emotions happening in the audience. Like there was like two people in the front were like in tears crying, and there's another person just like losing their mind, like looking like they're angry, but they're just like slave dancing. It was like, wow, like when you just turn the camera around, you see just like this full watercolor of emotion just like everywhere. And it's why those musicians up there are doing what they're doing. So it's so important to see see both like sides of that.
And I think it's important to see that because it helps you understand the musicians too. Because I think David Bowie was the one who talked about like how the reason that they chose to be like the performer that they were and adopted the styles they did is like because of the fans. Because it's like, it's not that, you know, all the different stuff that the artists do, it's not like, oh, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to commit, and this is this. It's like, you know, I saw like Creeper for the first time this year, and I didn't even know that there was like a whole thing behind it. It was just like, it's a Tuesday night, I'll go to Z-Bar, Punji Pit's playing. Oh, there's some band from England called Creeper. I'll check that out too. And I was like, whoa, they got some weird fan following. But I'm like, these fans are more fascinating than the band. But then it's like they're all, I didn't even know what was going on because I saw one person just like solid black. I was like, okay, I like the aesthetic because I thought it was like a tattoo at first and like the dimness is Z-Bar. Then I started seeing it all around. I was like,
oh, not here.
Yeah, what's going on? And then then the singer comes out and it's like that. I was like, okay, who created what? And Bowie kind of talked about how like, you know, you can throw stuff out, but it's more like, oh, you see a lot of your fans doing stuff. You almost kind of feed into that.
Yes.
And that's even the way, you know, I looked at it with Speedball is like, no, what are the fans noticing and digging and lean into that? So that's where I think like capturing the fans is equally as important as capturing the artists on stage, just because it is a reciprocal thing. And if you only see the stage, you're only seeing one half of the equation. Yeah. Combined with the fact that just if you're at a show, a static camera to me is like the video equivalent of the person standing and holding a beer in the corner. And for me, it's like, truth be told, like you're probably learning just as much about me when you watch my documentation as you are about the band and the audience, because you're seeing like, basically my camera is turning towards what I notice. It's like, oh, that's neat over there. Oh, what's happening here? Like it's
like a person would at a show, not a, you know, just like a tripod.
Yeah.
That's just like set there and just like, boop. Yeah. It's like, you actually get to kind of feel like a person at the show. Like, oh, that was crazy. I'm back over here, you know?
Yeah.
I love that.
Like at Mommy's Cigarettes the other night, you know, they were doing a whole bit to where Donnie from The Response, they were just like, you know, this next song's for Donnie. Where the fuck is Donnie? And someone's like, I think Donnie's out smoking. Somebody go get Donnie. So it's like somebody goes to get him, and I just followed with the camera.
That's amazing.
And it's just like, Donnie, come inside. And it's just they said something. Back in. And sorry, all right, now Donnie, now you can go back outside now. And so I just followed him back outside because I'm like, this is fun. I want to see where he goes.
That's amazing.
And he just goes back out to smoking again. I'm like, I like this. You know, it's all those things. And I've started just, I mean, it's the same as like I went ahead and did like the backwards stage dive at the show the other night with the camera. Because I'm like, all right, if it's getting knocked around, it's holding together. I feel safe doing this. And I've done that a couple times where I've just like run across stage, or, you know, I just like all that POV stuff. How, you know, Vinny was here, the photographer. He was standing aside because it was kind of rowdy last night. and people were just like jumping off stage into people. And so Vinny was in a safe area. I was like, I haven't got back and reviewed the footage. Like, fuck it. So I just like ran across stage and just like lunged. And he's like, just like, so that way I just thought the idea of like, a camera person lunging at a camera person.
That's great.
I need to start doing that more because that is not expected.
Truly a unique perspective that you do not get. You always see the camera, maybe somebody going at them, but the camera person actually doing it, that's amazing.
But doing it specifically at the camera
At the
people.
camera guy.
I'm like, why haven't I thought of that beforehand?
That's great. Because they think of all the people who are going to do that. You're the last person in the room they expect to lunge at them.
Because I did that to somebody one time. Is everyone was kind of doing stuff, and I just like, I did it to Matt Schladen. That's who I did it to first. I forget what show it was, but they were standing at a safe spot, and they weren't taking photos at that. They were just there. But I was like, I'm going to go attack Matt. Just the whole like side to side. So I just, during a side to side, I just like moved also across, and like Matt just looks up and I think just realizes at one point they're like, Bo's not following somebody. Bo's coming for me. Like sort of reaction. Yeah. And it was just like, fuck you, but laughing. Yeah. So I was like, that's all right. I'm going to have to try that more if it's safe enough, but I just like all that stuff being, experiential. So that way it very much makes you feel even more like you're there at the time. So it's like sometimes I'm up with the band, sometimes I'll drift into the pit. It's all like whatever the vibe is at the time, sort of thing. So, but that's sort of the community thing. That's what I hope people get from it. I don't know. I mean, is there something else that I should be aiming for people to get out of it? Have I gotten so far into my zone? Do I have like some sort of myopic view of like the potential for what I should be documenting? Do you ask to open the door for a suggestion, or do you ask just because you're curious as to like what I think versus what you note? Is this when I flip the table? Is the cameraman attacking the cameraman now? I mean, that perspective, I think it's just, as you said, I think you adding that new perspective of just not having the stagnant like camera looking at the stage is such a important part of it. It's like not just documenting the band, you're documenting the audience, the entire experience, the people coming through. And I'm not sure if you were asking like if there's any suggestions, but I can't think of much. It was almost sort of like but I think you also answered it too when you were talking about like practicing with it because you're asking like, how would you, I'm trying to think of the original question, but it's basically like, what would you hope people ultimately get out of it sort of thing? Like why do it in the long run? It was almost sort of me figuring out like, now that you've heard what I think and hope people would get out of it, is there something in addition to that, as also a member of the music scene, that you would hope people would get out of it, that maybe I just like.
Yeah, that even if you're playing headliners or Steve's Kitchen, like you're valued and that this is worth capturing forever and documenting and archiving because there's so many times where a band I think this is the most obvious one where like a band plays a house show that's not very well attended, but then way down the line they get really big. People are like, I want to see like when they first started. I want to see like when they were playing like at the house shows in small venues, and like so those become really precious to fans, and almost fans get nostalgic, or they really wish they like to live vicariously, like as if they could have been there for like one of their very first shows. And so I think people get that out of it. I think, we think about the audience a lot, but those band members as well, they watch them and they take notes and they learn from it. And that is something we just don't get as musicians, is like a perfect, like a good recording and documentation of how that show really went. Cause like, when you're in the moment, it's really special, and you're just so present in it that you barely remember like what happens sometimes when you get off the stage. You're like, whoa.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so seeing it from a audience perspective is super important, because as we discussed before, this is not about you, the musician. It's about the audience primarily. You know, you're not up there to go like, yeah, I killed that. I played that really well. I hit all my marks. Don't care about anything else, you know, but you want to see, like, especially if you're caught up in that mind state, which I think every musician gets caught up in, like, I want to be on time. I want to be in tune. I want it to sound right. I want to hit all the cues right. And so if you are caught up in that, you provide an excellent perspective to look at what the audience reaction is to those parts. It's like, did those parts actually hit? If you were like too busy, you know, messing with your instrument, or you just weren't able to really look out, you provide an excellent point of view of how did that land with the audience. You know, it's like it's like the dream of like what directors of films and photographers wish that they could capture from their audience. Like, wouldn't they wish they could be there when the audience first saw their film? How did it land with an audience? Like, they wish they could be there when somebody first sees their photo in an art gallery. Who's like standing there, like transfixed by it, and like what is going through their head? And you're able to give musicians that kind of unique, you know, we don't know like how people react when they put it on in the car for the first time.
Yeah.
You know, they don't know if they skip it or if, you know, they really like it or not. And so that point of view of seeing you play the music and immediately seeing that response and having it being documented is really invaluable, I feel.
I like that. And you mentioned that directors wanting to know how the audience first reacts, and it probably won't, because I've only done like a few feature-length scripted films that I've done like premieres for, but based on knowing me, it won't surprise you probably to hear that like I set up audio recording, and on every one of my DVDs there is a hidden audio track, and it is the premiere audience, like audio from inside the theater. And I'll actually, a lot of the time when I'm rewatching old film projects of mine, I'll actually, more often than not, I rewatch them with the audience, just because it is like listening and being like, okay, that, like you said, that landed.
Yeah.
That didn't have the reaction that I anticipated. Oh, that had a reaction I didn't expect it to. So it's like going back, because, you know, your mind's eye can only remember so much. So like going back and like listening to the premiere audience audio, it's like,
yeah,
okay. But then I also, like, for friends of mine where it's like, oh, I didn't know you back when you did this. I would have liked to have been there if I could. I can be like, and you can put this on when you watch it then. And it's sort of the same thing. But, you know, it's funny when you talked about like that idea of like, you know, oh, Bo showed up and this has made it, you know, he sees it as like worth documenting, you know, you know, there's part of me that almost feels bad that like sometimes I get that, like, you know, that status, because I'm like, don't put that status on me, because even if I'm not there, I guarantee you it's worth experiencing.
Right, yes, of course.
But that was it was after like just out of nowhere, it was one of the times like Jalen just sent me this like huge long, like, you know, nice message after I'd attended a YDOM show. And, you know, it was actually Hawthorne Merkel that, you know, I was hanging out with them. And I said, okay, this is not me trying to, you know, because I can be my own worst enemy. I think a lot of artists and, you know, creatives can. So I'm like, this isn't me trying to be annoyingly objective devil's advocate, but this is just sort of a type of feedback. So I do always like getting feedback in all of its forms, you know, just because as a teacher, it's like, okay, what worked well today? Because whatever did and whatever didn't, that'll choose what I do tomorrow. Mm-hmm. But I was like, you know, read this over that Jalen sent me. What do people see about me showing up at shows that I don't see that makes them send messages that are nice like this? You know, because I'm like, that is something, it's the same sort of thing to where it's like, this is coming from the audience. You know, it's like, I can't, you know, same as like, oh, we played, but I couldn't see how the audience were reacting. It's like, okay, you're the audience, like you're the musicians that I'm documenting. What is it that, you can see and that basically merits this that I don't? And, they gave me insight, which, has like stuck. I was like, okay, because Hawthorne said, because people know that you document and you do it so avidly, that when you walk in the door, that it's not only saying, hey, this is worth documenting, but that people have gotten to know you well enough that they know that you drift from one thing to the next based on whether or not it inspires you. And so not only when you walk in the room, basically people know, like if there were 10 of you, you'd be in 10 different spots of the city documenting and recording everything. But not everything would inspire you. And so that is when you've chosen that one show out of the 10 or 12 or 20 that are going on in that city. It's not that it's just worth documenting, but it's because some intuition tells you there is something inspirational here. And as like a person on stage, me knowing you the way I do, and then recognizing you came in, it's like, okay, something in here is inspirational. If I'm on the stage, not only does that give me a boost of confidence, but it gets me to also pay attention around the room, because it's like, okay, maybe it's me, but it could be multiple things. And so it gets me to be more mindful of the rest of the show when you come in. And so that's what people see. And I was like, okay, I never would have known it, but I appreciate that feedback, because that becomes like very helpful feedback to consider when like doing that sort of stuff. So, that's when you talk about that sort of worth thing, like that's one of the comments that came into mind that's, I've gotten in terms of like, feedback as to, okay, what impact does this make? And that's what's sort of been imparted. So,
yeah, hopefully the thing that's taken away is Diablo's, here. So this show is worth documenting, and it's this cultural thing we do is worth documenting as a whole.
Yeah.
And, he can go to the ones he can get to, but it's not saying like this show has got the stamp of approval. This is a good one. This is a bad one, because, and that's the takeaway you really want. It's like, overall, this is everything that this scene and this culture entails is valuable and worthy of documentation.
Yeah.
And so have them knowing people coming out, taking time out of their day to go document that, it kind of helps build that narrative and solidify that for them. And of course, like this is going to happen. This like, and this is just how it is. Musicians see you walk in, they're like, we got to bring it.
That's what I've been told too.
That happens.
People have told me that.
And I know that's not what you want to incite when you walk in a room where people are like, oh, Diablo's here. Like, am I in tune? Like, but that's just how it is, because they know that they're going to see it up on YouTube in a few days.
Yeah.
And so it's this healthy kind of motivation. It's not like, I don't think it's anything like oh no, like this A&R for this big company's coming in or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to be terrified. It's this, oh, this is cool. Like, let's really bring it tonight, like, but of course, like, going back to the ideology of bands, like I absolutely respect, and that's something I've pointed out for years, like watching bands playing to a very small amount of people, or bands playing to bands like they're playing the biggest show of their lives. And I love that. Yeah. And I think that is beautiful, because there's nothing more kind of deflating than a band purposely like, where the singer turns around, let's cut that song. Let's just kind of get out of here. Let's cut that one. And it's like, we don't need to play that. It's just, it's super deflating, and it's disrespectful to the audience, I feel like. And, and if you're there documenting it, it's like, oh man, that's that being documented. It's like, geez, because, for people kind of struggling with that, well, first you should always play, because it just takes one person. Like you're doing it to inspire people, and if there's one person in that room that like you move, that's worth it. Absolutely. But when that camera comes in the room, they may think like, oh, this is going out to the world still.
Yeah.
And so that I'm sure that thought process happens as well. But you had mentioned before when you went to that show, that Boner City show, after leaving the hospital, you saw the audience as particles and the band creating waves that move the particles like buoys on top of water. Is there any other moments like that where your perception of reality was changed by what you were viewing through your camera?
Now I got to go through the Rolodex of shows in my head. At least one comes. What was my perception again? Change? Is any perception changing?
Yeah, any perception change. Like you suddenly saw the audience as particles being affected by these waves. Like the audience, when an audience moves in a motion, it's like they become one fluid object together, and you kind of lose yourself in an audience and become a part of this bigger whole.
Yeah, one that comes to mind offhand. I would say would be the latter half of the tabs at No Comply 2. And it all sort of ties together with what I was talking about with school, because I'd mentioned I do those workshops with teachers, the one I call them wonder workshops, to where, I'm trying to put teachers on an even playing field of sorts, to where so often at the time they get so lost in the content that they forget to think about the how. Like the content's incidental to the how you teach. To where that is why I've brought in some people like, Caden Moore came in and taught teachers, this is how you tag. And I'm sure teachers are sitting there thinking, when the fuck am I ever going to tag a dumpster? And that's my point. Exactly. Because I guarantee you 95% of the stuff you're teaching in class, kids are thinking, when the fuck am I ever going to do this?
Right. They're thinking the same thing.
So I'm putting you on that level. But the reason I even created the workshops for teachers is because I realized, okay, there is a need for teachers to be more curious and creative in class. Because prior to that, I'd done like this whole working with teachers to do more like passion-based stuff, in particular within science classrooms. Because, at the end of the day, I think we pigeonhole the scientific method into something that, old dudes in white lab coats do within labs and stuff with chemicals. But it's like, no, what you were talking about earlier when it comes to like practice, it's like, okay, we tried this new song. Oh, it didn't land. What didn't land about it? Maybe it was this. Let's try it again in the next show. Like that is a scientific method, but it's like somehow it has been taught in a way that like it is seen as separated from that. So I was like, you know what? We have to teach these processes anyway. Why not teach it through whatever it is that, students are wanting to explore creatively and that sort of thing. And working with different teachers, I found that the teachers that, when they were having students do these in the class, if they were also, as the teacher, trying out some sort of goal, because I told all the teachers that you got to model what it is you want to see. So it's like, even I did like one myself working with them. It's like, okay, I'm going to do something to where it's like I'm modeling for the students. This is how I did a music video that I was like showing, like, here's something I've never done in terms of editing, et cetera, et cetera. And I found that the teachers that were actively modeling that sort of like, it's not, hey, I worked on this at home over the weekend. Look at what I did over the weekend. But rather they were sitting on there working on it like in downtime in class from other students. Those students had better success. So I was like, okay, that led to the workshop idea. What led to this, though, is that band moment where I was watching the tabs. And, just the fact that, like, here you have these, like, 15, 16, 17-year-olds playing for, 1,200 people in the bowl. And everybody's just going along with whatever they direct them to. It's like they got them in the palm of their hand. And I had this weird meta back out moment where it was just like, I stepped out from this whole thing, like this whole vibe, and my brain thought, I wonder if they feel the same level of success now in school. Because if they don't, that's a failure on the part of education, because they should not feel this level of success here that they don't otherwise. So it's actually something to where afterwards, what kind of led to the design of like the way those projects looked is I did interviews with like members of the Tabs, with like Lux, so I ended up like talking to, I figured, okay, there's also that thing that works out to where it's like, I've got that connection of like, I've played shows with them and I'm in the scene. They'll be candid with me for these interviews, but it's also not the same as if they were students in my county, because I teach out in Bullitt County, because it's like, it's the difference between if somebody came up to you and if your boss came up to you and it's like, how can I be a better boss? You're going to be like, you're a great boss. Right. Versus if someone that is, a friend of yours is like, hey, I'm going to get, a job in another state and I'm going to be a boss of this company. You work for that type of company. What do you wish you could tell your boss to help me be a better boss for these people? It's that same sort of distance to where I was like, okay, because I started out the interviews the same with all of them. I explained like my role as an instructional coach, and I said I work with teachers. And so imagine that I am working with, if I were working with your teachers, what might make the, how would your classes have to change for you to feel the same level of success that you do when you perform at shows within the classroom? And in particular, if any of your answer in any way, shape, or form involves you being able to incorporate more of your passions, how might that look to where they don't feel appropriated or exploited for a grade? It's like, and that was like the launching question, because I'm like, that's a heavy question to kind of start off with, because it's like, you kids are into TikTok, do a TikTok dance for it. It's like, oh, that's so cringe. Don't do that. Don't do that. And so basically I got all these interviews from like a dozen different, like all ages musicians. And then I sat down with a group of teachers and they just sat and read over them. And then so based on this, like, okay, could students, investigating the scientific method and doing all these different could it look like this based on it? And so whatever the teachers created, then I gave it back to all of them and they gave them feedback and we did that back and forth. And so this whole thing that really, you could say all the way up until a couple of weeks ago, like when I had graph artists coming into the building, I wouldn't have had graffiti artists talking to students had I not done that workshop with Caden over graffiti that the assistant superintendent came and just wanted to check out and was like, oh, this is cool. And I would have never done that had I not done that project, and I would have never done that had I not had that moment that I stepped back from the camera. I was like, oh, and I had that mountaintop view again. Yeah. So that's at least one that comes to mind, just because it is that's that idea we talked about earlier too of, yes, this is a practice in this environment, but you back out and it's applicable here too.
Yeah. Wow. So. Yeah. It's like seeing you can't see the forest from the trees, but it's not just seeing it from the observation of the mountain. It's seeing it from the bird as well. Yeah. You can live in the trees and leave and come back. And it's really important for people to see from other, it seems so simple, but to see from other viewpoints, but it is something that is really tough for us to do until you really kind of jump in the deep end. It's like when we learn a new language, it's really tough until you get through, tossed in the middle of Madrid and they're like, live here for a year. It's way more effective than Duolingo for a year. And you come to really appreciate and understand that culture almost, within a very short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's easy especially when it comes to like a teacher, like educator, and somebody who does graffiti. It seems like two worlds that are so far apart from each other,
Mm-hmm.
but where both parties can like learn from each other is that connecting point. And when you had mentioned like, if a grade makes somebody like feel a certain way and when you mentioned grading process, it made me think, oh my gosh, can you imagine if bands got a grade after they played a set? Like an official grade from the audience, like there was the judges and stuff. And it's like, all right, C-. That would be insane.
Grades are the original cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
That we're all, it's like, you got to study to get an A because that'll get you into good college.
It's like cryptocurrency because we've all agreed that it has merit.
Yeah.
On some level, or a group of people that is like the majority of agreed that this has value, this grading system and these degrees.
And it's just so arbitrary. Yeah.
It's something as subjective as music is. To grade that is insane.
Yeah.
And it goes all the way down to art, to every aspect of life, to say this has this objective value of blank is just is a very odd place we've landed as far as what is conventional.
And I think that's the thing I like also about the music scene and just like music in general, because, I'd mentioned I did so much like filmmaking stuff. I was just making films for fun. Mm-hmm. And everybody almost kind of had the pressure. It's like, well, if you're putting all this time and work and effort into it, you should at least try and enter it into some festivals. And that's where you get into that grading thing, because it's like, do you merit being a part of this? What's
your color grading looking like?
Yes, it's and even getting into those circles to where it's like, I joked one time where I said one of my rules of filmmaking is fuck your fancy camera, because anytime somebody, it's like, oh, we're working on a project. Oh, really? What you doing? Well, we're shooting with red. I'm like, oh, I instantly don't care, because it's like if you're a gearhead, it's like the story isn't there.
Yeah.
And I don't. Yeah, it might look great, but it's gonna be empty. So it's like, but it's weird though, like, because I was even talking to someone who was filming at the LDB show, and they're like, "Oh, you do a lot of filming? Do you do any stuff like filmmaking the scene?" And I was like, "No, because it really isn't. There isn't like a filmmaking scene. Like there's all the. I know there's like the film society, but it's also weird too that it's like it's worded like that.
Yeah, that's wild.
To where it is all like, oh, they do their own festival and all this sort of stuff. And I feel like what I love about bands is everyone's just like, fuck it, let's get together, practice, see if we can come up with some music, and that's it. Yeah. Whereas like with so many projects, it's like, let's make a movie together. It's like, oh, what are we going to do? We're going to try to like get into a festival, distribution. Hey, yeah, I'm good at editing. How much are you going to pay me? It's like, nobody is like, hey, you want to be our drummer? Sure. How much are you going to pay me? Like, no.
Yeah.
So that is the thing that I think is a shame, is that there isn't that, like all of my Diablo episodes and all that sort of stuff. It's just me editing, because I just love editing. Like, I shouldn't love editing as much as I do. Like I'm especially with the Diablo show. I think it was Trevor with Guerrilla Warfare one time came up to me because he edits, and he's like, as an editor, I want to tell you, you're insane. Because he was talking about Diablo episode, because he's like, as an editor, he's like, I know how much time it takes to do some of the stuff. He's like, you're spending way too much time doing what you're doing to just like throw it out there and be like, here, 12 people watch it. And I was like, yeah, I know. But that's also gets into, it's like, oh, I like it when somebody who is into that recognizes that and appreciates it. But I just do. I find it fun because it's the way I do those episodes is I'm building a puzzle when there is no box or no picture to build. Because I've edited for scripts. That's easy. I can burn through that. When I do all these Diablo episodes, like, okay, I've got 10, 20, who knows how many hours of footage. How can I craft this together into something? That's why they end up so different, because I just start going off, same we started this conversation 20 times over, it would go 20 different directions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the same, but I don't know. It's just once I get in that zone, I find it fascinating because, you know, to even tie back to your question that started this, you know, when's a time to where like I was filming and I was like, this would be the episode, which I'm not going to lie. When I made this episode, I talked earlier about fun with, not fun at. I thought musicians in the scene would see it as a fun at. That was my worry. Was the episode where it starts off with, hey, we've got a phone, and it goes down there. I don't know if you've seen that episode or not.
I think so.
So it was an episode. So basically I was at a show and just somebody was like, hey, we got a phone. Anyone phone? I was like, because it happens so often.
Yeah.
And then I just thought, I've been filming so many shows. How often has this happened? And then I was like, you know what? I'm always like trimming this stuff out, but it's funny. I like going to these shows for those human moments.
Yeah.
And, you know, but it's like if somebody's like, oh, my guitar broke, somebody got an extra guitar. It's like, yeah, all right, I'll trim that out when I put it up for them. You know, because that, you know, if a band doesn't play a song well, that's one thing. But if it's like, okay, there's like 2 to 3 minutes where somebody's getting a guitar out of a car, I'm like, I'll cut that out for them. So this episode is where I went back years and it was just like, we're all those. I just stuck them all together.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
Because I was like, you know what? That if it does right, and that's actually where it turns out everyone who ended up watching, they're like, no, this is the most human compilation you've ever gotten, because it opens up these credits and I have like, oh, this episode features footage from, and it's just, and it goes through 110 band names. You're seeing name after name, and it's like, how the fuck is he going to have like 110 like bands featured in footage? And then it just opens up with Speedball performing, and we were doing a performance, and Caden came up, and we were doing a Batman theme, and I'd try to get Caden to play Commissioner Gordon, but then he, you know, to like call out Batman, and he's like, I'm not feeling it. Pure serendipity, walks out at the moment where I would have planned to have him walk out, is wearing like this brown trench coat. So I'm like, oh, is Caden gonna
doing the bit?
Is he doing the bit that I asked him to do? And so everyone else at Speedball is just like, we're waiting. And Caden gets on the microphone. It's like, hey, did anybody find an iPhone? It's like Caden had just gotten like super stoned and couldn't remember where his iPhone was in Headliners. So he interrupts the middle of our set.
It's amazing.
To walk out. Because he's like, sorry, I was fried. He's like, I barely remember doing that. I was like, it's funny.
That's great. And then also, if it's like, imagine Commissioner Gordon being like, I'm sorry to bother you kids, but Commissioner lost his iPhone.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if each of you could look and see if you could find it. That's comedy. Especially, and did he walk up there with the big old trench coat?
Yes.
That's great.
But then after that, then it cuts to, you know, antithesis at Big Rock Park. Hey, we got a phone, and it just keeps going.
Wow.
We got a phone, found a phone. Somebody's got a phone here. Old Spinelli shows, you know, Castle Ellerby, a show last week. It is skipping across years. And that is where someone told me, they joke, they're like, it's like everybody poops. It's like every band, whenever like something goes wrong, they're like, shit. Until like, so I think it was, Jeremy or Seamus with the Anemic Royalty, but they're like, the fact that when you watch this, it's like, it is every venue. It's every circle of the scene. It is every age group. To where it starts off like, because the whole joke is every time someone's like, okay, so we're back at it. Our next song is, and it's just like something happens. Mm-hmm. And so I edited based on that. So you get like phones for like the first 5 minutes, way more than you'd think.
Wow.
But then it evolves into, it's like, oh, we got a shoe. And then somebody else, we got to shoot. It's like, how many clips do I have of people losing shoes at shows? Keys. How many? It's like, so then it becomes a game where people are watching. It's like, how many times have people lost shoes at shows? And it's like 1, 2, 3, 6. Like it just keeps going. It's like, what? And then finally it gets past like lost stuff. And it's just like, oh, I broke a string. Now we go through all the broken strings.
Wow.
So it's like we go through that. And so there is every interruption you can think of to where it's broke a string. Somebody get a guitar. Somebody get a guitar. Somebody have like a spare this, a spare. Does someone have a drum key? So it's like looking for things. Then it's just like, all right, I'm just going to go ahead and change the strings. Oh, don't ever change your strings during the set. But
you're not BB King in that one clip where BB King changes the string live. You cannot do that. So,
but it's like, no, you get length for length, them strings being changed. You're just like, the whole time, like all the music in the background, I found like some vintage, like elevator on hold music.
That's perfect.
So it's just, that's perfect. It's like, okay, that little piece of music ends. And that I remember Mandy from Deddy afterwards, she was watching it as it was like premiering, and she just texts, she's like, is the whole joke of this episode is every time we think music's about to start, something interrupts?
That's amazing.
And I was like, yes. But it is everything. There's like weird technical difficulties. There's musicians who are too drunk or stoned to remember their own songs.
Yep.
False starts. People stumbling into the equipment from the pit.
Wow.
People running into my camera and just shutting it off. People walking up and just interrupting, fights breaking out. Like everything that you could think of that interrupts a show. It's like, I realized, oh, I've got multiples of and so I stuck them all together.
Wow. That must have been a hell of a job. That must have been, I mean, my God, going through all the footage, like hundreds of shows. Wow.
Yeah. That's when I was like, that's where somebody at one point asked, they were like, this was a while back, someone's like, what's the craziest thing you've ever made? I was like, this might not meet your definition of crazy, but I'm like, from a technical point of view, this is crazy.
This was crazy.
Because I'm going through years upon years upon years of archival footage to find these 2-second clips of, hey, we got a phone. And that's where I also joked. I was like, this might be one of the more unique things of a music scene, because not many people, we talked about earlier, there aren't many documentarians, but it's like, even for those who's going to be dumb and crazy enough to sit there and go back through all the stuff that they shot and be like,
right.
I'm going to put all these things that I would normally cut out together, but with intent. So that was something to where, like, yeah, there was the worry that, okay, this is going to be fun at, not fun with, but it actually turned out to be like most people's like favorite episode, because they're like, I can't believe this exists, sort of thing. This is absurd. So that's another one of those like backing away from the camera things, to where it's like, this stuff that annoys me and feels almost like an interruption. This is all right. This is the human moment.
Yeah. And that's an extremely rare and fun and unique like moment to capture and then make a compilation of. That's incredible. Yeah. I cannot wait to watch that episode.
The only part that people tell me gets overwhelming is I do have a section where it's like, hang on, we got a tune.
Oh, no. I mean, that you maybe have to cut some chaff on that, I imagine. Did you keep them all?
No. If I cut, that would be
the tuning one would be that'd be a feature-length film.
But when musicians stop and they tune, and rather than tune with the pedal, they're tuning like by ear.
Oh, there you go. That's
and I just started like, as it goes on, I just have another, but I let the audio, so they start layering.
This coordinate.
You think so, but it gets to the point where like I had so many stacked, it's like it sounds almost like an orchestra tuning up.
Oh yeah,
when you have that many going at once. Because at first I thought, okay, it'll just be
chaos.
Yeah, just chaos. Once I put them, I was like, Oh, they actually like it does. It borders on sounding like an orchestra with all the strings and all that. So
no kidding.
That's where it does get discordant for a minute until it like all just sort of gels. And it's like, whoa. And so it's like seeing all those, it's like you're hearing the scene as a whole tune sort of thing.
Ooh.
So that's, I don't know.
I like that. Wow.
But it's just also a very silly episode because originally I thought, how many like phone clips can I put? But then it was we've got a phone. Oh, and a shoe. I was like, well, if I put shoes, and then once I started doing that thing, it's like one thing connects to the next. So, which tends to be a lot of my film editing is I treat scenes almost like, I'm going blank on the terminology for it, but like ciphers, where it's like one thing visually leads to the other. Because like the non-narrative documentary I did from like when I backpacked through China, I had hundreds of hours that I shot just like, going through by myself, filming whatever. And then so when I got back to the States, I was like, how do I edit this? And I decided, you know what? I'm just going to make this my starting point, and I'll set the rule for myself that every shot needs to have a visual connection to the previous shot and to the next one. Doesn't matter that we're skipping all over the country. Is there some sort of visual connection? And so that way, even though you might go from like remote landscapes in Tibet to like the busy subways of Beijing, there were like little subtle changes that happened in each that like led to there. So it's like that tends to be a lot of my film editing is like looking at how does this thing connect to this thing sort of thing.
It's just going to the work to provide that experience for people, specifically like for our scene, is incredible. I think people would want to view those moments in between music, like the lost shoe, lost phone, lost child, whatever people find in the audience that they're like, hey, I think it doesn't matter like what scene that would belong to. I think people everywhere would want to like view that and see that, because the moments that we like cut out of these performances and these documentations, the ones that we view as not aesthetic or this just uncomfortable or to be avoided. I think those are oftentimes the most human moments, as you said before, and most genuine moments. It's like this is real. This feels real. It's and going back to like what you said about when a band like messes up or doesn't like runs into a snag, or like somebody's like dancing too hard and they fall into the drum set, but they keep playing, and they have audience members run up and like try to put the snare drum and put the cymbals back, and they're still trying to play. And like that is this beautiful chaos that comes with a live show. And I think that's why we need to be reminded why we go to these live shows, because they're unpredictable. They're impromptu. We don't know what's about to happen next. And even though music is one of those things that has like a designated start and end to it, whereas like I had mentioned, like stand up before is like a bit more like vibes you kind of go off of. Like music is this thing that people get so involved with physically that it's just a whole new creature and experience of its own. And cutting out those moments that aren't, intentional is almost taking away from that genuine experience that is like a show that you go to and attend. So I appreciate you keeping those in and maybe even making a compilation of those moments. But Diablo, it's been an absolutely incredible journey just having you on and speaking with you today. I really appreciate you being here.
I appreciate you having me. Yeah,
of course. So you can find all those episodes that you had mentioned, all the videos that you have filmed at Señor Diablo on YouTube.
Yeah. And it's just youtube.com/Señor Diablo, and it'll take you there.
That's great. Because once again, like with the name Señor Diablo, it has this connotation, but then you meet the man behind the name. And it's like, this is the most wholesome guy ever. This is a great dude. But is there anything else you wanted to voice? Anything else you wanted to say to the audience before we go today?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've touched on a lot. Is there anything that you really wanted to, in our little nugget of time, like that we didn't hit on, that you'd hope to like pull out of this in my shotgun blast of responses?
Perhaps like one thing I really wanted to get into, but we did end up covering, and we went there naturally, was the audience is involvement as much as the band, because videographers, they stand there and they capture the band the whole time, but you really said it best, where it's like half the experience at least is the audience, if not, just it's at least half. And so like I wanted to dive into, but you had like really done a good job of like why it's important to turn the camera around towards the audience. I had a whole question about like when should we turn the camera around, and like why it's important to do that. And it's because you're at an event, at a show where there is a lot of things going on. There's more dynamics than just the band. There's like the guy who's outside smoking a cig and he's missing his cue. So you run out there and be like, "What? Hey, you're supposed to go on." Oh, am I? And then you run out back. That's a part of the experience, because like that's what people there are. Like they'll say, "Oh, you saw the show? You saw the video from the show?" Like, "Oh yeah, the band set was good, but like there was this moment where like we had to go outside and find the guy and then bring him back in, and then he left again." Like you don't see that often, and that's what's so important about like the perspective that you bring, which is so far beyond the tripod that gets sit with just the iPhone sitting there, just getting the stagnant, drum cam or whatever. And so I think it's just something that people don't hear enough about, as like why videographers love to get the audience point of view as well, and why maybe videographers may not have that in mind as much to capture the audience. I guess I should say the audience loves seeing the audience in these videos. They love to, because they like to see, I think, whether you're an audience member or a musician, you kind of view it from that lens when you're watching a live video. So if you're a musician, you're like really locked in on the musicians. You're like, "Oh, what are they doing?" Like, this is the kind of the view I want to see, because I'm watching a peer doing what they're doing, or somebody who I respect, or somebody I'm really interested in. And the audience is maybe like, what is it like at that show? Is there lots of dancing going on? Is there a barricade? Are people sitting down? Or like, are people like bunched up together? Is there a pit? Like what's going on with that? And just it's the importance of capturing the full scene and you take it to, the absolute extreme of getting, you're on the stage, you're in the audience, you're outside, you're watching people climb like the roof, you're watching people have a conversation by the bar, it's like watching somebody buy somebody a drink or something, or laugh about something while a band, and then like it's like people having conversation, then turn, and now somebody's stage diving off of the stage. And so that's one thing I had noted of what I wanted to cover, but we had, thankfully, that it was it's just something, you see a lot in live videos, is that you don't see the audience, but it's just such a fun part to experience. It's like being a part of that. And so you can bring a part of that show going experience with you, more of those dynamics of a show going experience when you turn the camera around and see what the audience is feeling and what's being experienced from
that. And I guess as you said that, just being able to sort of process, I guess if leaving anything, it would just be like, just be authentic to yourself. I think is what it is, because, as I mentioned, I never knew that at my age I'd be doing all this sort of stuff. Instead, I just sort of like, I'll just be myself in all these scenarios, and just sort of led to that. So it's like filming that way, I'd mentioned it's like, I see all these different ways that stuff usually is filmed. Not for me. This is just this is how I film. It's being authentic to like that sort of thing. And same with like me as an educator and, all the different stuff I kind of talked about. It's like, this isn't what I planned on doing, or this isn't the way that usually like, teaching is looked at, that sort of thing. But it's like, even though I can maintain like, okay, you're not going to interact exactly the same way at a hardcore show that I will when I'm sitting down with like the assistant superintendent, two very different audiences. I don't talk to, the people at the Board of Ed any different than I talk to, say, Tyler or anybody at a hardcore show after their set. It's like the context might be different, but it's like I'm not playing a work version of me versus a different, like there's not all these, it's like, no
switching.
Yeah. It's like, I'll just stay the one version of me, and just the context might be different. And so there might be like slightly different boundaries, but it's like, still, it's like, no, just stay authentic to yourself is really my sort of takeaway, whether it's, artistically or anything else. Cause, if you do, then basically rather than trying to, chase like some sort of like, mindset you have of like, what an artist should be, or, it's almost that sort of high school thing. It's like, oh, I want to fit in with this clique, so I got to do this thing. It's like, no, just stay true to yourself. And like, you might not fit in with where you think you will, but you'll find your tribe eventually.
Yeah.
And when you do find your tribe, that's a special thing. And so it's like, I think had I been so focused on trying to be just a certain version of myself rather than being authentic, I don't think I would have like landed in the scene the way I did. And I think that is one of those things that everybody as adults are born into, a family they can't really control. And like usually your friends are dictated by your zip code. So it's like, as an adult, the hardest thing to do is to find your tribe. And a lot of people never do. It's like they just stick with their high school friends, or it's like they get married and they stay in that little clique, and that's what works for them. But I think if you stay authentic, you'll find that tribe. And that's where like I consider myself like, just as much as you expressed it, like, like the scene being lucky that I'm doing all that, I feel incredibly lucky to have like the role and the place and the home that I do within the scene, so.
Yeah, that's very well said. I think people will have tribes or groups that they idolize and want to join, but they'll find that they have to be a version of themselves that they're not to fit in. Mm-hmm. And even if they find, if it goes well where they can put on this mask or this facade and kind of fit in to be a different version of themselves to fit in, they'll find out that even if they do eventually get accepted, there's that feeling of, well, they never accepted me.
Yeah,
they accepted what I put up for them to see, and then for them to audit, as what who I could be. And so that never ends up in a good place. So I think just always from the jump, if there's a tribe that you want to be a part of, or a group of people that you want to be a part of, or a community, and you find that you have to become somebody other than yourself, then it's not worth being accepted by it, because you won't end up happy at the end of it. There'll be that moment of happiness when you get accepted. Oh, they accepted me. And then you're like, they didn't accept me though. They accepted who I portrayed myself to be as. So the beauty and like the longevity comes from being authentically yourself and finding a group of people that accept just that. You, and without any other polish or production behind who you are. It's just authentically you. And so I think people, fight so long to be accepted by groups that don't really care about who they are truly. And then when sometimes they never even get accepted, or sometimes they break through. When they do, they find these aren't my people.
It's like the Groucho Marx, I don't want to ever be a member of a club that would have, or be in a club that have me as a member, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's very well said. And it's important for people to remember that. And I think that's one of those things that goes back to being applicable to music, work, relationships, just life in general. And with that being said, Diablo, thank you so much. I'll get this right again. Señor Diablo on YouTube and Disposable Diablo on Instagram. Yeah. But once again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.